Well, it's 8:03. I'm going to get started. Of course, people will keep trickling in. I'm Emily Weiler with the Montana Public Health Training Center. Most of you know me. I'm here with Amy Elliott, who is my training coordinator. We will be here all day. And so even if our cameras aren't on, we will be here and managing the chat box. If you guys have any tech issues or have questions that get missed, I'll make sure that the speakers know. And if you get booted off for any reason, which sometimes happens, just click on that link and come back in. We'll continue to let you in from the
Grab my
waiting room.
mouse. It's right there on the table.
I'm muting people now. So thank you so much for joining us. We've got three presenters today and people involved with this group. We've got Kate, Ryan, and Jeff, and we're very excited. And again, holler at us if you have any questions. We'll get rolling. I will quit sharing my screen here, and I will turn it over to our presenters. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Emily. I'll go ahead and kind of get us kicked off here a little bit. And if you guys would, we would love to have you in the chat, introduce who you are and where you're from. I'll give us a little bit of an idea of folks that are out there and the work that you're doing and perhaps where you are in Montana or perhaps out of state, as Emily had mentioned. It'd be great for us to know as we kind of get to know you a little bit and figure out as we talk a little bit about grant writing and some of what you might be looking at. We got an understanding of context. It helps us out immensely. My name is Ryan Tollesany. I've been with the University of Montana for 28 years. I've been teaching grant writing during most of that time, I think, probably all of those years. And I currently oversee a center called the Center for Children, Families, and Workforce Development within the College of Health, along with Emily. And what we do is a lot of work around grants and contracts, trying to figure out how to solve problems around the state. And we need to get money to do that. And got a large group of folks that help in that process to make that happen. Two of them are here with me today. Have them just briefly introduce themselves. As you'll see, we've been working with each other a long time. So if one of us makes fun of the other one, it's not because we're mean-spirited or anything. It's because we know each other well and we present all the time with each other. And since we don't see each other face to face, we've got to poke at each other a little bit on Zoom in order to keep the relationship fresh. So first, I'll have Jeff introduce himself. He calls himself a policy meddler. We're not exactly sure why. It's really strange why he came up with that wording, but Jeff, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself here.
Great. Jeff Folsom, policy meddler. There should be a badge included, right? As Ryan said, right off the bat, he's going to give me a hard time, but Jeff Folsom, I work with the Center for Children, Families, and Workforce Development at the College of Health in Missoula. I'm Helena-based, and I do a lot of work with what we talk about as revenue max, maximizing revenue and leveraging different funding streams coming into the state, trying to understand policies around children and families and how we can support local communities, not just access funds to implement, but not just access funds, but also access information they need to implement those policies and provide implementation support. So I like to be around policy. I'm a bit of a policy geek, or as Ryan said, I consider myself a policy meddler. And I think that I like that term because it's, oftentimes we think of policy and we think of the policies we're reading in the headline of the paper. But really policy is also happening, and I think more powerfully happening sometimes at the local level and with the organizations that you guys are working with in local public health offices. And that might be local policy around how you're managing your business or decisions you're making about what direction you're going, and how you do what you do. And underneath policy always, of course, is incentives. And grants are all about being incentivized to ask for funds to do what we do. Policy is about incentives. So I'm glad to be here today, and I'll hand it off to Kate.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Chapin, work with Ryan and Jeff at the center. And at the center, I serve in a variety of roles. Most of us at the center have many hats that we wear. And so, I serve as an evaluator, help with the curriculum kind of design and facilitation with our workforce development, assist with writing grants, all sorts of different projects. And I think, one of the things that I love most about the work is that we really position ourselves at the center in a place where we're helping others build the capacity to kick butt, right? So to really make sure that they're able to put their great ideas into action. And so, part of the kind of the spirit of this workshop is really helping you think through, you've got a great idea or you want to solve a complex problem and you need money to be able to do that. And so, big part of what we do is really helping others think through how to build their own capacity so that they can bring their great ideas to life. And so I'm happy to be here and look forward to chatting with you all this morning.
And as we get started here, hopefully, as you guys have your cameras on and off, you're eating breakfast, you're getting something to drink, whatever it might be, it's all going to work out well. As we get you kind of woken up here a little bit with this first hour or so, just kind of explaining to you a little bit about what this process is all about. And one of the best things you can do as we move our way through is anything you have as a question you don't understand, you don't quite get. We're going to be in small breakout rooms here in a little while. And we want to make sure that anything you have questions about, you're asking us. We've been doing this a long time. And we understand there are various levels of understanding, people who have been writing grants a little bit, people who are absolutely brand new to this process. We want to make sure that we answer any question you have. So oftentimes we get questions related to, can we do this? Can I do that? Can I get money here? Can I get money there? Budgeting and ways of hiring personnel and fringe benefit rates and indirect costs. There's all these different things that are a part of this that are sometimes really difficult to understand. Acronyms that are being used. We may use some of them. And as we do, time us out and say, hey, wait a second, I don't understand what you're talking about here, back up. So we're on the right page. As Kate kind of mentioned as well, the thing we like about this as well is you can kind of be entrepreneurial in the public health human service world a little bit more than what we kind of get confined to in private nonprofits oftentimes, or we get confined to in public agencies where it's like, all right, I'm seeing this problem. I've got to somehow bring evidence to this problem in order to verify it through some more objective data. And then we got to figure out how to solve this because this is just flat out not right. Now, the references we make are going to be to Montana for the most part. And I see, looking in the chat, there are people from all over the country that are here today. And so we also work with multiple states across the country as well, Missouri and Virginia on an initiative and other states as well. So most of our experience that we'll talk about, though, is related to some of what we do in rural and frontier areas of Montana. And as Kate mentioned, a lot of what we do is try to help build capacity so that organizations are more successful in being able to address the needs of their state. And what we see in a lot of situations is where urban areas have brought in a lot of those grants and contracts, outcompeted some of those rural and frontier and tribal communities in Montana, especially, that we would like to see that playing field evened so that there's greater access to these services in areas that are oftentimes underserved. So as we go through this, anything you have in terms of questions along the way, we'd love to be able to answer for you. We won't be able to, you won't get to the end of this and say, oh my gosh, I am so ready to write a grant. You probably will be more knowledgeable and understand the process a little bit better and have a good starting point and understand what kind of resources you need to bring to the table in order to be successful moving forward. And we'd like to get you to that point here as we make our way through. So let me go ahead and get this started here. Gave you a little bit of an overview there with regard to who we are and what we're all about, the work that we do. Again, we get excited about it because it gives us a chance to be kind of entrepreneurial and think about how to solve problems once they're identified, once they're substantiated, and bringing money in from multiple different sources in order to do that. In fact, we get grant money right now to get you grant money, to get grant money out there. We come up with lots of different ideas and ways to address the problems that we see in communities. And we've been involved. I was involved with helping people write a grant for rickshaws one time. It was like, oh my gosh. So it goes from that to childcare to aging services, prevention, falling, all kinds of different ways in which we can look at beginning to solve different problems in our communities. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just kind of start out with an issue that we're finding right, we're going through different problems that we could talk about, and it's like, oh my gosh, where do we start? And as I reached sort of the end of my career, I was thinking, I hope we're giving the next generation a world with fewer problems and a system that works better than it did when I was in it. And I'm not sure we've done that. I think we might have created a few more than I'd like to admit. But what we're seeing a lot of, this is certainly nationally, but we're seeing a lot in the state of Montana as well, is this increase in anxiety among children and youth. And so we do a lot of work with children and youth, do a lot of school-based prevention programs. And what we're seeing is more and more anxiety. And oftentimes, for those of you who have a mental health background, this anxiety can lead to depression that can be cyclical in many ways, that goes from anxiety to depression to perhaps increased numbers of suicide attempts or suicidal thinking that we're seeing more of than we have before. So part of our fear with this is then, well, it's good news and bad news. Some of the good news of that is we're hoping that young people are being able to identify negative emotions, and a result of identifying those negative emotions, they're capable of being able to figure out how to better manage them. Probably one of the greatest skills we all need to develop as we age is our ability to manage ourselves. And we certainly want to give young people the opportunity to do that so that they're successful managing their emotions as they continue to age. What we're seeing, though, is so much more suicidal thinking and suicidal attempts in our state. And we've always been a high-ranking state in the country, either one or two in the country, and we're seeing it even happen a little bit more. And one of the worries is that we're kind of normalizing this anxiety identity during a really important time period in young people's lives, that their identity gets wrapped around this, and it may be difficult to unwrap that as they continue to age. This could be something they age out of, and they manage well, but we see something that we haven't seen in many, many years. So this is something that many of your states probably wrestle with as well. We see this in terms of the national, and many of the studies we see nationally as well, these increased numbers. And so that problem being one that we can identify, we could name, and I'm sure many of you have many other problems that you can think of as well, is one that's a good starting point. Now, at this point, it's sort of anecdotal. All right, so we said, gosh, we're seeing this. Talking to some school administrators, and they're talking more about this. I'm meeting with people in hospitals, and they're seeing more admissions of young children than they've ever seen before. All right, so we're starting to gather evidence in order to substantiate this problem. Now, if it was just, I was with Kate and Jeff, and we go out and have a couple of drinks, and we're appetizers, and we say, yeah, this is really a problem. Gosh, it really is. Yeah, I've seen it too. I heard my child say this, or I know a teacher that said something like this. And we tried to write a grant proposal that said, Jeff, Ryan, and Kate think that this is a real problem. If I was on that review committee, I'd say, oh, isn't that nice that Kate, Ryan, and Jeff thought this? I don't really care, because these are just three people who might have some information about this, but I need something more substantial before I'm going to peel off $200,000 and give it to these three people because they think this might be a problem because they were talking about it while they were having drinks. It ain't going to work. So I've got to substantiate it with something more objective, more substantial than three people think this might be a problem. So we got to dig deeper. We got to begin to figure out what other sources of data we might get to. So if you could, in your chat again, start thinking about and write in, if you think, all right, here's an idea, here's a place to get more information. Where would we collect more data? Where might we get more information in order to substantiate this problem? So in the chat, what would you say? What are some good sources we would use? And again, then we would start to look for opportunities for funding. Now, we're going to go, as you're writing in the chat, some other sources for collecting data. We'd be looking for a request for proposals, an RFP. We would be looking for a request for applications, an RFA. or we would be looking for a notice of funding opportunity, NOFO, NOFO. Is there any other acronyms I'm missing? Kate and Jeff, those are the three that come to mind, but it seems like about every other year or so, somebody comes up with a new possibility of saying, oh, and I'm thinking, what in the world? Thought I had them all. So you might hear us use, or potential funders out there use, RFP, RFA, or NOFO.
Sometimes you might hear a request for information, which sometimes comes ahead of a request for proposals, where someone who's trying to gather information from people with subject matter expertise on the RFP they're trying to write. So you might see ROI as well. RFI, excuse me. Request for information.
Yeah, RFI. What acronym did you use for request for information? RFP?
Yeah, I think I said ROI. I think I had return on investment in my head. Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Too many acronyms floating around. All right. So some of you put in the chat. All right. Yep. Absolutely right here in terms of other ways that we could begin to bring in data, something that's beyond our anecdotal observations. So right, we could look at ER numbers. So we can be talking to hospitals, local hospitals, or if this is, you got to think about sort of the geographic distribution of how you want to address this problem. What we do is all statewide. And so we would be looking at talking to some of the biggest hospitals in the state, saying, all right, give us some of your, and this is not easy to do sometimes. So when you're facing a deadline for an application, it's good. We've been around a long time. Jeff and I are old guys. We know a lot of people in the state, so we can oftentimes be able to say, can we get this data from you? And we're able to get it sometimes a little more readily just because they know who we are and what we do. But it can be very difficult to get some of this data as well. When you're facing a time crunch in terms of trying to get this put together, it can be real challenging. But yeah, looking at ER numbers, talking to the local hospitals now, then also, as you guys have, taking a look at the literature. So it could be a matter of saying, all right, what do we have in terms of recent studies that have been completed in order to substantiate this? All right, so in those studies, oftentimes they may be doing something along the lines of taking a look at these numbers across the country within a certain geographic area, and being able to use that, again, as substantiation of this being a particular problem beyond our own observations. Now, what we have a difficult time doing sometimes is saying there was a study done in the Northeast, and if that study was done in the Northeast, a lot of times it may be a reviewer of the proposal might say, well, that's not, the Northeast isn't Montana. So how is it that you are substantiating this problem by taking a look at a study that's done someplace that's completely different? And we get sort of weird around, well, if it isn't done in Montana, then it doesn't count. It's like, okay, this is something that they're seeing in other parts of the country where they may be smarter than us and they may be ahead of us. And, you know, we ought to be paying attention to this. But yeah, that is another place we can begin to dig for that information. Also, we work very closely in Montana with the Department of Public Health and Human Services, trying to get data from these folks. As was mentioned here, and this is called YRBS, another acronym, Youth Review Behavior Survey. I hope I'm getting them.
Youth Risk
Behavior Survey, that's right. Youth Risk Behavior Survey. We've got somebody on our team who I think before she goes to sleep, she reads it all the time. She's completely into this data, looking at YRBS data all the time. And this is something that's done usually every other year. It depends on if it's middle school or high school. The very best data set we probably have in Montana. And that data set is saying exactly what we're saying in terms of this problem, that we've got increased number of young people across the state that are experiencing anxiety, depression, suicidal thinking, and suicide attempts. Those numbers are going up. And we're also seeing this more and more in rural areas of the state where oftentimes they may think, well, this is a more urban problem. Although for many of you, you might not think of Montana as having very many urban areas, but they're seeing it in smaller communities, and school boards are addressing it now with various levels of acceptance of this being a problem, or whether kids are lying and completing this survey. We're spending time trying to help them think a little bit about the fact that this really is something that's happening. We need to get on top of this moving forward. So these are great sources. School counselors, one that's listed here as well, also a great source, and some that I have talked to that are saying exactly this, that their numbers are increasing way beyond what they've ever had, despite having decades of experience. So yeah, these are the sources we want to have, and this would help us then substantiate this moving forward of, yes, we've got a problem, and as a result of that, we are going to match this up with a particular funding opportunity that would allow us to move forward. Now, what I'm going to do is kind of just walk through I can here. I'm going to walk through sort of what we do from here, and I'm hoping that I'm still on the right page here. What would we do from here in terms of being able to think about this, like the next steps here? What do we do? Where do we go from here as a way to think a little bit about sort of our movement forward? And for some reason, I am not being able to.
You might have to stop sharing and reshare. Zoom's been having some issues lately. It might be that if it's not responding.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Now it seems to have switched. All right. So I'm gonna stay in this spot for a little bit here, just so got a chance to kind of look at the different. We're gonna go through this a number of times, and so this isn't your first time at this and only time at this, but these are usually the different sections we then get to once we begin to do kind of substantiate that problem. And that could be in a problem statement, or it could be in a needs assessment in order to substantiate that, in fact, there is a problem here. And we need to begin to figure out what we're going to do to address it. These other sections are ones that are typical in most grant applications. They may vary a little bit, but for the most part, these are the sections that you'll end up seeing. So when we have a section that's dealing with objectives, they're saying, all right, what's your objective here? You've substantiated the problem. You've given us sort of independent verification and of substantiation, literature, hospitals, school folks, whatever it might be, YRBS data, existing data sets that we have that more specifically localize this problem. Now, what is it you're proposing to do? All right, we're going to reduce, we're going to eliminate, we're going to decrease. We'll be using sort of verbs along those lines that describe our desire to address this problem, so that we would like to figure out how we're going to prevent it or reduce it in some way. So in the objective section, then we would begin to write, we want, and there would be a decrease would be one, obviously. We'd want to decrease suicide attempts by 10% in year one. In year one, let's say, since we're kind of in only in the second month of 2022, so it'd be decrease suicide rates by 10% in year one. And maybe let's say our year one is going to be March 1 through February 30, 2022, and part of 2023. Decrease. All right. So we would have to figure out how we would, as we get down here a little bit, figure out how we would evaluate that. But that would be certainly one goal that would be important to us, and also important to a funder who's looking at investing in us, that they would like to see this problem decrease. Now, there may be ways that we also think about increasing. So we might want to increase, for us, what we spend a lot of time looking at is increase help-seeking behaviors. So we want a younger generation to ask for help. We want to increase their ability to seek out assistance. In our state, my generation has done a poor job, I think, of handing down help-seeking behaviors. So we have a tendency in our state, and you've got to think about this in your own context of whether sort of culturally what's going on. So oftentimes when we develop a solution, we may take a solution from another state. We do this all the time. I saw somebody here who was from Ohio. We've taken a lot of ideas from Ohio. We love some of the ideas that are going on in Ohio, and work with them a lot. And we look at what's proven to be evidence-based, and say, well, let's take this and imported into Montana. Montana is its own unique creature in that we've got our own culture that may be different from where some of the previous programs have been implemented that have proven it to be evidence-based, that may not be as rural or as frontier-like as Montana is. So as a result of that, we may have to make some adaptations to it or think a little bit about being different. One of the things that we in Montana in terms of our culture is generationally, we don't have a high rate of help-seeking behavior. People see it as a sign of weakness to seek out help for mental health problems. So as a result, we have to take that into consideration when we think about what kind of a program we'd implement. But one of our objectives might be to increase help-seeking behavior or to increase acceptance of help-seeking behavior or to decrease stigma related to mental illness. A lot of different possible objectives we put in here. Somebody have something they want to say?
There's just a question in the chat. If you want to take a peek.
Sure thing.
Objectives. Or I can read it to you.
Yeah. And I'll have Jeff and Kate take a look at this as well. I think that and we're going to probably use confusing wording here too. What we see a lot of is, as you have as general objectives and specific objectives, sometimes we have goals, objectives, activities, goals, objectives, actions. All these words are sometimes used interchangeably, and it's hard to know the difference between what they are referring to. So oftentimes we may have, like you have a general objective, and within that or underneath that, there may be more specific objectives or actions, or it could be a goal, decrease help-seeking behavior. And underneath that may be a specific set of objectives or actions that would then support that goal. So the actions might be to, educate school counselors on, or increase parent awareness around, or something along those lines, or even more specific actions that would then support that overall goal. So that's sometimes the way that we view it, is those larger, and I think that the same thing, I haven't seen aims that much. I mentioned aim, but that we also think about it, I would think that aim or goal, and then we get to more specific objectives or actions that would then support that larger goal. Kate or Jeff, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just echo what you're saying. Oftentimes, aims and goals are sort of synonymous. So the broad kind of, what are our broad, what do we broadly want to do with this funding? And then objectives or activities or outcomes being the specific ways in which we are reaching the goals of the grant. And you're right that in different RFPs will specify the terminology to use, but typically aims and goals, the way I've seen it, is sort of synonymous. Objectives, activities, outcomes are kind of used interchangeably.
So in the case of the suicide piece, I think as an example, to break it into this example, the aim is the big audacious goal. We want to maybe eliminate suicide might be the aim, or to reduce suicide, or to reduce that's the big audacious goal. But then the objectives are, and the general and more specific is what you're actually going to be doing to reduce those attempts of suicide, or to reduce that, whether it's a public campaign, or whether it's more education and teaching, or whether it's universal screening, or you might have different ways of approaching that. That would be, the objectives would be implementing those types of interventions. But the aim is, I think, when I've seen aim, and I don't see the word aim a lot, but when I do, I think of it as kind of the big audacious goal.
And I think, just like you guys are saying, oftentimes they'll use the terms, and then you'll think, oh my gosh, what do they mean here? We've read these 100 times, and are they referring to an objective as a goal? is it an action instead of an objective? We also haven't talked about things like benchmarks. It's like, now how are they using that? So every time the new application comes out, they seem to use the words differently, and there's no shared meaning. It doesn't seem like with those that produce the application. And so each time is a matter of us kind of dissecting, oh, I see they're referring to this. But having a thought partner in that process, or oftentimes we might even call them up and say, just want to double check something here with you, because I'm not sure I quite understand what you mean here. And then usually I can get a little more information and then go, oh, okay, I see. My head seems to always think in goals and objectives or specific actions. And then they throw in new terms and it's like, oh my gosh, now, but I want to be sure, because I'm not going to spend, I just worked with a group. We spent, I don't know, probably 60 hours writing a proposal to HRSA, and they ended up being a finalist, but not getting it. And it's a lot of time. So we want to make sure that we can clearly understand exactly what they're asking for, so that we don't miss one small little thing, because there are strict enough rules and guidelines around developing these proposals that somebody might throw it out just because you misinterpreted what was being said. So I don't want to assume anything. Phone calls to those folks is really helpful.
I just want to say
Kate.
really quick, just that just the moral of that story is that you're not a dummy dum-dum by not knowing what they're talking about. Like, you asking these questions, what's the difference? Everyone who's writing grants are asking those questions as well. So just wanted to normalize that it is confusing.
Not a what?
Dummy dum-dum? You're not a dumb person. I think I got that from you.
Oh my
actually.
gosh. Yeah, we are still asking those same questions just because it's like, we're confused. We need to understand this exactly. But yeah, the language is not consistent and people are using different terms all the time. And so yeah, it's good to sort that out. All right, benefits on this would be obvious in terms of we want to reduce, we want to decrease, we want to increase knowledge of, we want to increase certain behaviors. One of my benefits for this would also be to create a generational change so that we have a younger generation. When you think of help-seeking behavior, we would create a generational change so that a younger generation will see seeking help, decrease stigma as something that changes, so that it maybe dies with my generation, but a younger generation says, oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, you need help, you go ask somebody for help. That's what we do. And that would be one of the benefits. We also want to make sure that we're looking for a solution here. And this third item here, as we propose a solution, is that we look at the problem source. All right. And this is something that I get a little bit crazy about, because as you'll see, and I've been on the side of it as funding and being part of a foundation and reading grants and deciding whether or not somebody gets a couple $100,000 to on the receiving side. And I've done both of those sides for many, many, many years. And I want to make sure that we come up with a solution that's going to align with a problem source. So if we are looking at a particular problem, in this case, increased levels of anxiety, where are we going to go to in the source of this? So if we just get into treating symptoms that we're seeing, then, all right, so we're going to have more counseling available, and we're going to have more telehealth counseling available. It could be text-based support and counseling. Okay, that might address this symptom that we're seeing at this particular point in time, which is important. But how are we going to prevent this from continuing to escalate? And where might we go if we were to kind of think of this as a funnel? So we get down to the root or the origin of this problem, and think a little bit about what is it? And this is where I'd really go to the literature, or I'd look for a lot of those evidence-based programs across the world and find out what exactly could we be doing here that we haven't even thought of that gets to the source of this problem. So often, many of those solutions are ones that deal with some of the symptoms we're seeing. And in terms of treatment in this particular situation, absolutely vitally important. But we also ought to be thinking about programming that prevents this from continuing to escalate, that may be something different than responding to this immediate problem. We can respond to the immediate problem with more services, as we're attempting to do in Montana. But we also need to think about what is it that's going on that we're not paying attention to, that we need to be paying attention to, so that we can decrease the likelihood of this continuing to escalate. So that may be something, again, getting in the literature that may have something around social media, may have something to do with parents teaching kids skills at a young age. We look at a cool program in Australia that is around parents and children working together on a platform similar to this, where parents are teaching kids basic skills around managing anxious feelings. So when a child gets a stomach ache and gets nervous about going to school or whatever it might be, they're able to talk to them about that in a way that helps them identify the emotion, normalize that process, and have an opportunity for the child to begin to address that themselves. They're developing that skill. And that program has been proven to be evidence-based in Australia, which for Montana there's some similarities there. And the interesting part about that, which many of you may also come to this conclusion, is that it's also one that we're seeing good results with the parents. So the parents are learning these skills going, oh my gosh, yeah. So as coaches to their children, they are learning these skills as well, which is helping them manage their anxiety in this situation. And then being able to coach their child as well has been a benefit to it. So we are probably, the best thing we do is we're just thieves. We're looking for great ideas that deal with, again, the context and sort of the cultural nuances we have within a state like ours that have to do with the way we think, the way we believe, sort of rural frontier, and that has been proven to be effective in other areas. And then we're going to say, all right, we want that to bring in, because that has been proven to be successful. As a reviewer, then I'm also a little bit more excited about, again, this is, as I've talked a little bit, you'll get to know more and more how frugal I am, but I as the reviewer then am interested in that as a financial investment. So I'm thinking, this is money that I'm using, could be taxpayer dollars, could be donor dollars. I've got to be a good steward of that money. I want to make sure that that money is being well spent. And as a result of that, having something that's been proven to be effective in other places that are similar to this situation, this circumstance, this context, has more likelihood of succeeding. And as a result of that, it becomes more investable. So that's different than, well, while Kate and Jeff and I were talking a little bit about policy meddling, and then we started talking a little bit more about, what are we going to do about this problem? We've identified it. Hey, I got an idea. Let's do this. Let's get a giant slip and slide and have kids go. It's like, okay, you got to be kidding me. What in the world is that going to do? It's going to cost $100,000. No, I'm not interested at all, unless you've got some way of substantiating that this is actually going to work. This is not a good investment, and taxpayers or donors should be screaming at the fact that you're doing something that has a low likelihood of success. Now, it could be that the slip and slide worked for kids that were high risk for drug abuse. And we're making the claim that there's a parallel here. Well, you're gonna have to make a real strong argument in order to somehow sort of validate that as a solution of this problem, because it's something that hasn't been proven to be effective in terms of suicide prevention. Maybe a hard sell. So looking for something that's been done, that's been proven, that is evidence-based, is going to be incredibly important. And then looking investable moving forward. And this is where it gets fun too. And I think reviewers are looking for something that's different and unique. We have this habit in Montana, and we've seen it in some other states as well, of saying, gosh, you know what we need to do? And I've had this conversation with multiple funders, and they oftentimes get real stuck on this, thinking, you know what we need to do is we need to get a billboard. We need to put up a billboard. And I'm like, what do you mean put up a billboard? Well, whether it's meth or suicide prevention, you name it, we've got billboards lining up our highways now saying, don't do this, don't do that. This is bad, this is wrong. And if you look at the literature on that, what we have seen is kind of an initial, oh my gosh, I didn't know I shouldn't do meth or whatever this billboard might say, and then we see it drop down very significantly in terms of that doesn't apply to me. I don't need to pay attention to it. It's ignored and people get past that. So it doesn't have a very sustainable impact. When we have limited funds, which you probably have wherever you're at, we certainly have in Montana. It's not like we have infinite amount of resources available. We've got to get really smart about how we're going to use that money. So when I talk to a small community that has a donor that's given, $50,000, and they immediately start talking about billboards on the edge of town, I might figure out a way to help direct them somewhere else, because the science doesn't prove that this is going to be our best step moving forward. We're going to need to find a better way to spend that $50,000. So thinking about the source or origin of that problem, and think about ways that we can prevent, and this on the prevention end, or it could be the solution might be, we're going to focus more on these kids just need to have more services, more access to. So we're going to focus a little bit more on making sure that these kids are going to be, doing as well as they can in managing this on the treatment end with more telehealth. All right, then we got to figure out the cost. This is something where folks sometimes get sort of stuck as well. And this is just a guesstimate, really. I think it's going to cost this much. And so staying with this as a potential way of moving forward, and we said, let's go ahead and adopt this Australia program. I love it. I love this coaching thing that the parents do with their children, and they have different stages. It's called Cool Kids Australia, I think, if you ever look it up. And so it is kind of like seems to be like grade 1 through 4 or 5 focus, then a middle school focus, then a high school focus, a little different curriculum. And then there's a group of folks that coach the parents in a format like this, so that they know how to sort of move their young person through the curriculum and help them to figure out how to manage these emotions. All right, the cost of that may be, if I was to hire then a number of coaches for the parents, so that they were coaching these parents across, we have 50 people enrolled, school counselors, parents in, they sign up. Yeah, I want to do it. It's probably going to be moms more than it is dads. It's certainly the case in Australia. And then I'm going to need to hire quite a few of these coaches. They're going to need to have certain educational requirements. They're going to need to have certain qualifications and abilities to be able to coach effectively. And I'm going to have to pay them whatever the going rate is. And they may be part-time, maybe full-time, and they work for an organization that if they work over 20 hours, then I'm required to pay a fringe benefit, healthcare for a part-time person. Sometimes for part-time, some organizations don't require it. And so I've got health insurance costs, got fringe benefit rates and everything else. If I was to hire somebody full-time to do that, which is a possibility too, let's say the salary is $70,000. Oftentimes I may have then a benefit rate of like 25 to 30%, let's say 30%. At that 30%, I've got another $20,000 added to the 70. Now I'm at 90. I probably have at least $1,000 a month for health insurance. It's another $12,000. So now I'm at about $100,000. So I may think, oh, good, I'm going to hire somebody for $70,000. That's what I'm going to kind of request. No, you're not going to have enough money. So you got to make sure that you're accounting for these other areas that are also going to add into that expense column. Some of you may have access to accountants and bookkeepers and other folks that have a background in budgeting. Some of you might not. And when you don't, this becomes a little bit more challenging sometimes in figuring this out. Now, I'll tell you a quick story here related to cost that you should try to avoid. And again, a lot of what we share is, here's the mistakes we made. Try not to repeat this mistake. Is I am usually so frugal that I'm trying to think of, we can do this program and we can save a little money here, we can save a little money there. And so when I started out in this early on in my career, I was competing against other states for federal dollars for a particular granting opportunity. And I found lots of ways I could save money. So my budgets came in lower. And so we would generally have the same program in Montana as they have in Massachusetts or Colorado, but my budgets were a little bit lower. And so I thought, well, if the funding committee ever had to make a decision, they probably would more want to fund us because ours looks like we're more financially feasible than some of these other states. what I came to find out was everybody was being funded at that rate, and I was just getting 20% less. Now, when I hire people who come in and I say, all right, we got to get a little creative here because let's say it's travel. That wasn't quite this bad, but instead of renting a car, you're going to need to take a Greyhound bus. It's like, who is this guy who came up with this idea that we didn't need to have a car to go back and forth, or find relatives in these towns to stay with. You don't need to have a hotel. It's like, all right, that was bad planning. I didn't go quite that far, but ask for the money you need and don't get in a situation where it's like, well, we can scrimp and scrape and do it for next to nothing. No, in order to solve a problem, let's make sure this is what we need to do it. Anybody else who's trying to solve a problem out there are asking for what they need. Don't get yourself stuck in a poverty mentality, even though you might work in areas where there's limited funds. The foundations I've been a part of, government initiatives we've had around grant funding, there's money out there, and there's a lot of money out there. Ask for what you need in order to be successful. This is also true with respect to salaries. So rather than saying, gosh, we can do it, Montana ranks one of the lowest states in the country in terms of salary levels. I'm not interested in perpetuating that. So this is what it's going to need to have a person to solve this problem, because it's a complex problem that needs to be solved. And if I bring somebody in 15% lower than what they probably ought to make, they probably have one foot out the door and are looking for another job. I want them all in. So let's figure out how we pay them what they're worth in order to ensure that these folks are running it and love their job and love what they're being paid, and this isn't an issue. So don't get yourself caught in this poverty mentality or frugality mindset that I have had, and ask for what you need in order to be successful. Equipment, supplies, travel, lodging, part-time, full-time people, whatever it might be, make sure that you include that. Again, it's just a guesstimate. This is our best guess of what we might need. That can change along the way. That's okay. It's like, gosh, we thought we wanted somebody full-time, but we ended up finding some really good part-time people. Okay, we can make line item adjustments within that budget in order to make sure that we adapt as needed. If that's a good steward of a grant, we're going to make some shifts here. Great. Things change. What kind of shifts do we need to make? We thought we were going to need, we have a number of grants over the last couple of years. We had money in travel and lodging, as many of us have moved around the country or the state. We haven't spent any of that money because now we're all doing Zoom. So it's like, all right, let's shift that money. We could hire a part-time person to come in and backfill in some way. Let's make sure we spend it all, but let's get crafty about how we can do it so that we can still continue to address this problem. All right, moving on, we get to the evaluation section. This will always be a part of it as well. Thinking about how we're going to evaluate the success of this particular solution. Again, as a potential funder, I'm interested in knowing whether or not this works, and knowing whether or not this is something that ought to be replicated or duplicated elsewhere. So if this is working well, boy, I want to take that program and export it other places around the country or around the state, whatever the situation might be. If we took this Australia program, brought it in Montana, and we looked over the first couple of years and said, wow, we're getting some great results in decreases in anxiety. And we may be looking at our WIRE-BS data. So as was mentioned at the very beginning, or it could be ER admissions, it could be all those areas that we talked about. If we have that in the area we identify as a problem, and we've substantiated it with those sources, again, emergency room visits, could be hospitalizations, discharge data, other DPHHS related information, could be from counselors in schools, could be from our WIRE Youth Risk Behavior Survey data. We're going to go back and take a look at that and see whether or not, in fact, we have seen decreases perhaps. Increases in help-seeking behavior, maybe WIRE-BS that we can capture that in. It could be a pre or post test that we do. So if we were to focus this intervention in a particular area, again, staying with the intervention of this Australian program, we could do a pre or post. We said, all right, we are working with this particular 5-county region or these particular school districts or whatever it might be, that we could do a pre-post measure. If we were looking at help-seeking behavior, we would have a pre-test that would get to measuring that. We'd have a post-test to see whether or not, in fact, that changed. We would want to potentially have a comparison group to see whether or not, we can control for external variables, what have you, in order to see whether or not this is working. Again, funder wants to see whether or not this is a good investment. And if it is, we should duplicate it. We should figure out how to, let's put this in other parts of the country or other parts of the state in order to replicate it. And if it's not working, which I hope the evaluator would come in and say, this isn't working, you're not getting the results that you might be hoping for, then we would say, either we need to shift something here, which is fine. We've had 5-year grants that a year or two ago, we need to shift this. Great, let's shift it. The worst thing we could do is keep doing the same thing if it's not working. Let's make a shift here in how we're doing it, because what we learned from the evaluation was this, and we ought to continually get smarter. And then as we get smarter, make decisions about what we would do differently now in order to be more effective moving forward. So we want to have this evaluation as what we look at it as kind of a partnership with the folks that are doing the work in order to ensure that there is somebody from the outside that's helping that group get smarter about how they continue to proceed. Some proposals, grant applications will say it's fine to have an internal evaluator, somebody who's a part of your organization or team, or to have an external evaluator. I've kind of support more that external evaluator, just because they can maybe see your blind spots a little easier and be a little bit more objective than folks on the inside that may have sort of a conflict of interest and want to prove that in fact what they're doing is working. So it may say within a grant application, having an internal or external evaluator. Kate, you look like you were going to add something to that. You do this evaluation work a lot. Is there anything else you'd add to that statement?
No, I would agree. And I think it also depends on the size of the grant. If you're asking if it's a multi-million-dollar grant, then it's probably more realistic that you would have an external evaluator. But for, a smaller grant, I think it's perfectly appropriate to look at your team and figure out, okay, where can we, what are our resources to be able to evaluate this program?
And then you got to kind of think about on what level do you do evaluations. Some people may get a program. Let's say we run this program we're talking about here, Cool Kids Montana, we're calling it, and we've got and we give a survey out to the parents that are involved with this program and coaching their kids. And the questions to that survey are something along the lines of, did you learn something from this program? Did you enjoy the coaches that were a part of that instruction for you? Did it appear that your child had reduced levels of anxiety? That may be helpful information to also have in terms of having an understanding of the impact of the program. And that's usually on the very lower end of the evaluation scale, and it may be kind of in the middle to say, now, what does that look like in terms of that child's ability to function in school, at home, in extracurricular activities, those kinds of things, seeing that new knowledge be applied as a skill that allows them to sort of have healthier behaviors that would also, in a multi-year study, sort of move on along the continuum where folks would be looking in greater depth at that knowledge now turning into a skill that is leading to a healthier lifestyle. So a very important part of this process, evaluation. And then we'll talk a little bit about it as we get into our small groups, so folks can ask additional questions around this. And some of you may have had more or less training in research and evaluation. And so sometimes it's beneficial to have on your team, as you put something like this together, somebody who writes that section, who has more of a background in evaluation, that can be helpful. And then the final area here having to do with sustainability. And as I get worked up about all these areas, this is probably the one that I get the most worked up about, is with regard to sustainability. So oftentimes we get grant funding for 2 years, 3 years, 4, 5, whatever it might be. If you're just getting funding for 1 year and you're trying to implement a program like this, you won't be able to do it. It would be really, really difficult. There may be other kinds of really short, we want to build a playground. Great, here's 1 year of funding, go. That certainly could work. We need to have this equipment for, we've seen this with rural fire departments. We need this equipment. good. This is a 1 year funding. Go for it. Get that equipment you need and move that forward. It can work. What we do is more multi-year funding, because what we put forward may take, I would say, usually at least 3 years and typically 5. And as a result of getting that 3 or 5 year funding, this allows us an opportunity to make sure that the program kind of catches traction, that it gets fully implemented, and that then we sort of move, we're off and running a little bit going forward. Question here related to finding grant opportunities. We'll get to that as we get further on in our morning here. We have a place on our website you can go to, and that you will be able to see funding opportunities that you can go after based on keyword searches and those kinds of things. So you'll have an idea of where to search. We do all that searching for folks so that it makes it a little bit easier for you. Now, sustainability then, again, if I'm on the funding side of this and I'm reading a proposal that's coming in, oftentimes people will say, yeah, we're going to do this for the 3 years, because it may be just that we as a funding agency say, we're only going to give you a 3 year cycle here. We just do it in 3 year increments. So you have 3 years of funding. One of the questions we ask you, or one of the sections that is scored on the application, has to do with the sustainability of that project that you're proposing. And the project that you propose, you may say, all right, we're going to need $100,000 in year 1, 100 in year 2, 100 in year 3, something like that. Sometimes the funding agency may say you need to decrease the amount of funding by 10% each year to show your increased level of sustainability of that program, so that you're depending less on us and you're figuring out another way to move this forward. With this example of this Cool Kids program, let's say the first year it's going to be more than $100,000, but let's say it's $250,000. We say this is a reasonable budget for us moving forward, and we're going to need to figure out then how, if we have $250,000 year 1, and maybe we have a decrease of 10% each year, we're getting down to about $200,000 in year 3. What are we going to do in year 4? What's going to happen in year 4? Now, oftentimes what people might say is, then we're going to go find another funder. We're working with a funding agency right now, a foundation that's asking us to help them with sustainability of programs around the state. That doesn't look very attractive to another foundation. Say, oh, good, I get to pick up your year 4 funding of a 3 year grant, and it doesn't look very attractive to them. They want to get involved in something new and different and exciting that's going to address a bigger problem, rather than step in at the 4th year and go, all right, now we're going to fund you from 4, 5, 6. It'd be challenging. A lot of folks also will say, all right, we're going to talk to the legislature. And this is where Jeff does a lot of his work. And we're going to ask the legislature to fund this, because the legislature is or should be really interested in these decreased levels of anxiety, increased levels of help-seeking behavior, and the fact that it is saving us money. Yep, it probably would be saving us money in terms of ER admissions, hospital stays, could be all kinds of lost time that's around parents and jobs and productivity. There's probably multiple savings that we could also connect into our evaluation in order to prove that this is cost effective. And it would make sense for the state to say, we need to pick this up. So at year 3, if it's 200,000, we're moving to year 4. We think we can continue to move forward at $200,000. That might be a reasonable request from the legislature saying, yep, we're going to get state money, state taxpayer dollars, and we're going to appropriate it for this particular program because it's proven to be so effective. One possibility. But they get a lot of requests, and oftentimes they may say, yeah, we're all for this, but we're not going to give any money to that. We don't have it. And we're in a year where we've got another set of priorities. We've got a budget balancing problem, whatever it might be, where that's just not going to happen. So you have to be thinking about other possible creative possibilities for funding this that may include other sources of revenue. That could be a possibility. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get into some of our small groups. or what I like to see is people figuring out ways to shift priorities and current programming in ways that incorporate this. So it could mean shifting maybe the way schools are normally doing their business, or counselors are normally doing their business, or whatever it might be, as a way to shift resources and priorities so that this becomes incorporated within a particular organization or multiple organizations as a way to sustain this. It's challenging, but it's something that's important, because certainly a funder isn't thinking, oh, good, we're just going to give you money until, all of you retire. It doesn't work that way. And so you have to be thinking about sustainability. What's possible? Is there a tax that we might think about as a possibility within our state, within a particular county or city, as a way to sustain something like this in prevention, mental health prevention, whatever it might be? That's been done. We've seen that in other places. Is there a way to do that? Medical marijuana just passed in Montana. Well, medical marijuana a few years ago, recreational marijuana just passed in Montana. Is there a way to take some of that tax revenue and use that, since this may look like it's connected in some way, that would allow us to perhaps use those dollars to sustain this over time? We've seen it happen in other states, maybe a possibility. All right, I'm going to stop there. Jeff or Kate, anything else to add to that?
No, our next plan is that Jeff and I are going to talk about some specific writing tips. But before we do that, do we want to open it up and see if folks have questions? And
You bet.
Can we maybe take a tiny break too?
Sure thing.
Sure.
And if folks want to just chat in a question during this, take a 10-minute break, chat in a question. Perfect. We come back, we can grab that question before we start the next piece here.
Perfect.
yeah, great. So take it.
All right, Kate, you ready to get started? You guys have this next section. I think I'm running the PowerPoint here, so I'll go ahead and run through the
Sure.
slides here if you're ready to go.
Yeah, happy to do that. Before we go into our section, does anyone have any questions? Of course, I also want to say, while you're thinking of your question here, is kind of the plan for the next section of this workshop is that Jeff and I are going to talk a little bit about kind of writing tips and sort of how to put this all into practice, a kind of a shorter section. And then we're going to have a chance to get into small groups where we do a deeper dive. So there'll be multiple opportunities for you to ask questions, and you may prefer to do so in a smaller group, but just wanted to first open it up, a lot of information that we just covered, and see if there's anything that's burning questions that you have that you want to pose for the entire group. Okay. So given that I don't see any questions. Yeah, Ryan, if you don't mind progressing us to the next slide. Okay. So Jeff and I have this next section here, and we want to talk about, so Ryan, what he did is basically painted the full picture of, what are the essential ingredients necessary for developing your grant proposal. And we want to talk a little bit about the specific grant writing tips, but you'll see that when we kind of walk you through some of these tips, that they go beyond just pen to paper, or I don't know, finger to keyboard. It's really kind of helps you, I think, operationalize the concepts that Ryan talked about ahead of time. So just a couple things to keep in mind when you're writing this grant. And again, Ryan talked about this, so I'm just sort of reinforcing some of the things that he talked about. But I think number one here is we don't want to get into a position where we're just chasing the money. When you see a request for funding, or comes to your email box, it can be exciting to think, wow, maybe we could secure that 5-year grant. And as compelling or as exciting as that potential may be, we want to make sure that if you're going to do the work to write a grant proposal, you want to make sure that the proposal and what the request for funding, that's going to be aligned with what you're already doing or what your team or your group is planning to do. It's much easier to write And it's certainly much easier if funded to implement your proposal if it aligns with the work that you're already doing or you're planning to do. The second thing here to keep in mind is, you want your grant proposal to be a compelling story. Everyone loves a good story. And, if you think about the reviewers, the group of people who are reviewing all the grant proposal, they're human beings here, and they're having to read through a bunch of different proposals. And so when you think about really, creating a compelling story, you want to make sure that your passion for the issue, your passion to get rid of the problem or to address the problem, and your passion for proposing a solution to the problem, that you're conveying that in your story. Certainly doesn't mean that you don't also back it up with solid evidence. I mean, that's essential. But when you think about how do you want to convey the need, put your storytelling cap on. The second point here is, what you want to keep in mind is consider the ingredients of a fundable, investable project. And that's really, all the pieces that Ryan just talked about here, making sure that we've really identified the specific need, that we have collaboration with partners, that we have the capacity to implement the project if funded, that we've thought through what potential challenges are and how we're going to address them. For example, we know that there's a workforce challenge out there, and here's how we're going to go about. We're maybe going to shift some responsibilities of our internal team versus trying to hire given the workforce challenges out there. And then the last one here is, what are you already doing to address this problem? If you're not already working on the problem, right? If you're not already, kind of tackling suicide prevention, for example, you're probably not ready to apply for the grants. So again, doesn't mean that you can't on down the road, but you really want to be strategic and make sure that that your team is well poised for the work. We recently, Ryan was sharing with you all that we have a grant to help others write grants. And again, that's just aligned with our mission to help build capacity for other agencies and organizations across the state. And so we were recently working with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, their tribal health, around writing an IHS grant, an Indian Health Service grant. And so we were working, one of our partners there was a clinician who was really invested and motivated. She wanted to write a grant around, again, it was around suicide prevention. And so, and she hadn't, been a part of grant writing before. And so when I was telling her, I was like, really at this stage, when you're planning the grant, you are sort of a detective. And so you are going to put your detective hat on and see if you can uncover kind of the resources that we might need to write this proposal. Like, have you done this before? What's the documentation that you currently have in order to write the grant? Who's your team? So you're getting in that detective mindset. And then what I think is the fun part is you also then become the architect, right? So what is it that you want to build, craft, and create? So then you're also able to put that architect hat on as well. So Ryan, can you switch to the next slide? So preparation. So for preparation, Ryan mentioned this, and I think it can't be overstated, is that to write a grant, this whole process takes a lot of work. And certainly, usually things that are worth doing are hard. So we're not saying, don't roll up your sleeves and do this work, but you want to make sure that you've really thought through some of these preparation tips before you kind of fully roll the ball down the court. And so the one way that you can kind of prepare yourself for this process is, the first thing is making sure the grant's a good match for your project and your agency. So this is really doing your homework. Does this funder, only fund projects that have to do with children, and yet you're proposing something that has to do with, adults? Is the funder specifically funding projects that address disparities? Do they only fund projects to do with prevention, improving healthcare systems, whatever it may be? So do your homework early so that you can make sure there's a good fit here. The other part of making sure that it's a good match is really reading that RFP closely. You know, what's being asked of us? What's the timeline, right? Because this writing grants is a large lift. Do we have currently, is this a good time for us? You know, do we have the capacity to pull together a team to write the resources? And then if funded, you know, do we have the capacity or space, you know, in our organization to be able to roll this out well? And then, you know, is this doable? Like I said earlier, we partnered with CSKT to write a grant, and part of this grant application is that they needed a tribal resolution letter. You know, so they needed a letter from their tribal council chairman to say that, yes, we authorize this proposal, we approve, if funded, we support the implementation of this project. You know, well, there's only certain times that tribal council's meeting within the period of time that we needed to write the grant. So is it doable to be able to gain support in this capacity? So in this case that I'm providing here, this example is, you know, really that tribal resolution letter, is that doable? And then let's see. So the other part that we can do to prepare is, sometimes you'll see this online, is that, you know, with a funding announcement also is a webinar that's, you know, 1 hour webinar. And that we found that those are really a time saver to attend those webinars. It's a, you know, FAQs, frequently asked questions, or here's who we fund, or here's who we don't fund, or here's what we're looking for. And sometimes, you know, they're, you know, most of the times they're not only live, but also recorded. So if you're not able to make the live webinar, you know, go to the website. It's worth your time to spend an hour making sure that this is going to be the right fit. And if your questions are not still answered and you're not sure if you're a good fit for the grant, if you're eligible for the grant, it's certainly worth your time to reach out to the funder and ask those questions. So the second tip here is, you know, we're going to provide you a worksheet, and we're going to do that in a template in our small groups. And it's super helpful to really think through the anatomy of the grant, or the components of the grant proposal, and the ideas in terms of like idea formation. It's like, you really want to break this down in the most elementary way so that you're very clear about what they're asking, what the plan you're putting together, and make sure that everyone's on the same page. We recently did this with the project that we just submitted couple of days ago, is that we had, you know, we're assigning different people different parts of the grant. And so to have a really organized chart, while it felt somewhat time consuming to put it together in the beginning, it was a time saver in the end, right? So it's like, you know, go slow to go fast. Let's see. So building a team to help with the writing and the reviewing. So this is, I mean, you know, the example that I keep referring to, you know, we had probably, you know, 3 of our team members on it, and then 3 of their team members on it. And so really kind of thinking through, not that we, you know, and we were each doing different sections of the grant. So the best grants, the best proposals are certainly have many eyes on the idea formation. So you might have to pull in someone that's really good at budgets, or, you know, get the insight of an evaluator to help you think through your evaluation plan so that it's a sound plan. And again, a checklist can really help you organize this team. And then this last section here is creating a rough schedule with the goal of being done 2 or 3 days before the actual due date. So this is when you're really relying on those backwards map, you know, when you're backwards mapping, you know, here, if it's due February 1st, let's pretend that it's actually due October 27th. And then let's back up. What is it that we need to do? When do we need to have the first draft done, so that we, in our case, so that we could then send it to the tribal council to get their approval? And so that really backed up our timeline because we wanted to make sure that we got their approval. And so we didn't get ourselves, towards the end of when the grant is due and we hadn't done our due diligence to get the proper stakeholders involved. So again, really getting organized in this preparation stage so that you're slowing down to go fast. So now I'll pass it over to Jeff for the
Hey,
next
Kate,
section.
can I interrupt
Yeah,
for 1 minute
please
on this
do.
too?
Yep. Yep.
This creating a team as well is be really careful about who you put on that team also, because you may have people that just create obstacles and barriers to move forward. And so people may say, oh, we need to get so-and-so on the team. And I might be thinking, oh, no way. This has got to move. We have got to go forward. And if you've got folks that are kind of blocking forward momentum or change, oh, we tried that, didn't work. We can't do this because, and it's like, I'm looking for people on the team that could say, here are all the reasons it will work. Here are all the ways we can make this happen. Not all the reasons why this will not, this will fail. It's just not going to create the momentum and energy you need in order to move this forward. And as Kate was mentioning with the goal of, or the schedule, February 1st is a deadline. Well, let's say we're at February 1 right now. Let's say it's April 1st. I may tell the group it's due March 20th. We got to have everything done by March 20th because a lot of these too, grants.gov is one search engine that we'll talk a little bit about. And sometimes we have had times where it's taken an entire day to get everything correct and final format. And then it got thrown out and kicked out and something happened. It's like, you have got to have that done ahead of time because there's going to be something that will inevitably go wrong. And if everything's done a couple of days ahead of time, wonderful. Now it's maybe there are final things that didn't come up, or we've got the appendices of some sort. There's 3 forms we didn't fill out, and it's the downloading and getting it to that place. If you wait to the last minute to do that, we have seen groups who have done that and tried to turn it in. It was due at midnight. They got it in the next morning at 8 a.m. Nope, not even considered. So yeah, those are 2 important ones.
If I unmute, then you can probably hear me better.
Keep talking with a muted, Jeff. We enjoyed that.
Yeah, I usually have my best ideas. As I jump into this, I really want to invite anyone and everyone to throw comments into the chat section, throw questions in. We've been throwing a lot of information at you. Some of what I'm going to say is going to repeat and just kind of have a little different framework. But we really want you guys to zero in on things that are going to be helpful and useful for each of you. And so I just really want to encourage that. And as we get into small groups, of course, you'll get a chance to talk about more specific to your own stuff. I'm going to continue kind of the grant writing tips piece and just kind of the writing itself. And we can't say enough times, and you've heard it from Kate and Ryan both, is you've got to understand your audience. And we've got to be looking at building a relationship with our audience and know who we're writing to. Someone asked a question earlier about clarifying some language around objectives or those things. And as Ryan encouraged and Kate encouraged, call them, ask them, talk to them, build relationship, get a sense of who you're talking to. If you're talking to the kind of language you use, and as you see in the bullets here, avoid bureaucratic language and acronyms. You don't want to use $10 words. You want to have words that are accessible. You want this to be able to be accessible by the reader. Now, if I'm an epidemiologist and I'm writing a grant to the National Institute of Health, and my readers are going to be epidemiologists, then I probably need some $10 words. It's okay to use the vernacular of your readers and the vernacular of the science that you're working on in words that someone at a private small family foundation would just glaze over and not understand what you were talking about. So even as we say, avoid language like that and avoid $10 words, in some context, you need to know your audience. And so that's an example of that. If I'm a small local group and doing something very specialized and writing to a foundation, a family foundation, or even a federal foundation, who are those readers? Kate mentioned that sometimes it's volunteer, sometimes it's internal, sometimes they have external teams do it. It's, you know, what kind of passion are they bringing to it? Is it a job? Are they being stewards of their funding? This is all relationship stuff, is getting to know them. You can look up the foundation or the grant agency, federal, and see what they funded in the past. Look at what they've accepted. Many of those sites will post who they funded and what they're about. See who they funded. How do they write about stuff? What are their styles of writing? What was persuasive to them? Persuasion. Remember, you are writing a piece that is you are writing a piece that is to persuade an audience. You are trying to use your persuasive power. You are using the power of words, and this is all wrapped in the words matter. Words, what you say and how you say it. You're selling your ideas, you're selling different programs, you're selling policies. If you're a policy meddler like us, and you want to make it fun for them to read. You want to be able to get their attention. You may have heard, some of you or all of you may have heard of the ideas about ethos, pathos, and logos. And that's kind of a common framework when people talk about persuasive writing and persuasive speaking. That's important. There are different ways to persuade people, and when you're putting together your grant, you want to think again about your audience, and ethos is just the basic idea of credibility. You want to make sure that you come across in your writing as credible, that you know what you're doing, that whatever topic you're talking about, whatever problem you've identified, your objectives, your evaluation plan, that you guys have the know-how and the guts to get that done. Many grants will have a section called organizational capacity. That's oftentimes given a good amount of weight in the scoring. That's about your credibility. That's about why are you the one that they should fund to work on this problem? What is it about you? So you need to write to that. Others are going to be more what we in this framework, pathos, which is the emotion. You're going to see a lot of family foundations, a lot of smaller foundations, when you get, out of the government foundation world and out of the big foundation world. And a lot of you are going to be writing to those. They're very driven by the emotion of the issue. They may, if you're writing towards a suicide grant, we'll stick with that theme today. That family foundation may be interested in that because they've had loss in their family, and it may be appealing to them. So then your story needs to appeal to that emotion. Logos, and we focused a lot on that today, is the data. And a lot of you coming from the healthcare field and a lot of you in public health, we have a lot of focus on public health data and population data, and then improving what you're saying in the data part. Extremely important. And really whatever piece you're coming from, that being able to prove what you're saying and using logic and intellect also needs to come through. So think about all three of those. Think about that as you're writing, that you want to tell this story, and people keep mentioning this story. And think about, again, the reviewer in mind. You really want a seamless story. And when Ryan went through all of those different pieces earlier, and we're going to go through them again in the groups, it really needs to tie together. Imagine I'm sitting down and I've got 50 proposals in front of me, and I need it to be unique. I need it to be readable. I need it to be understandable. I need to be persuaded. I've got a lot of pressure on you to do all of those things for me. And I'm reading the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over. So you want it to be unique. You want it to jump out as something about your credibility or your passion towards it, or the way you're conceiving of the data, that gets my attention and that makes me see that, oh, these guys really have a handle on it and really have a way to approach this. It needs to be unique, but you have to be aware of what I would call terminal uniqueness. You don't want to make it so unique that it's outside of what they're asking for. This, I see this a lot. And you'll see at the bottom of the slide, follow the directions, follow directions, follow directions. I probably should have started with that. People that are putting the grants together, and the writers of the requests for proposals, and then the people that are reviewing those, they're looking for the format that they have provided you. They want you to stay inside their format because it's easier for them to read what they've got and to find. There's a score sheet. At the end of proposals, always go and look at the score sheet. You're writing towards the score sheet. You are going to see in those score sheets that there are areas that have more points and less points. Spend more time on the areas with more points. Write more deliberately on the areas. Be very specific and to the point around each of those areas that are delineated on the score sheet. People, in the name of uniqueness, oftentimes will start to think that they have a more clever way to present it. That they have, oh boy, if these people who wrote this RFP had really been thinking about it and were really clever and knowledgeable about this subject, they would have had these headers instead, and they would have asked for this information. And even if you have the most brilliant idea that ever existed, you're in trouble when it comes to scoring that grant, because they need to find the areas that they've asked for. They know what they want. They're the funder. They're the experts of what they're funding, even though they may not be the experts in the area that they're funding. You may be a far greater subject matter expert. You may have far greater ideas about how to approach this, and you want to work those in and show that you have enthusiasm for what they're talking about and a great knowledge base, and that you have an ability to show them information and data that makes you unique. But don't go so far as that you've pushed them out of what they think they want to fund, because they know what they want to fund. They have created a box that you have to live in. You need to stay in their box while you push that edge and demonstrate why you're unique in that box. Basic tips that you can see in some of these bullet points. Again, it's all about being reader friendly. It's all about think about when you've had to read long documents. You don't want it to be jargony. You want to hear the story. You want to be able to get to it quick. You want it, when it's active. If it's very passively written, you're going to be yawning and falling asleep. If I get bored reading your proposal, I'm probably going to miss things that might have given you a better score. If I'm bored, I'm not going to give the same level of attention to 50 proposals that I'm reading in a row, no matter what. I mean, it's just not humanly possible. We're not computer scored, we're people scored. And I need to keep your attention. I need to keep you engaged all the way through what you've written. So following the directions will help with that. Thinking about the link. So when Ryan described all those sections, and when we get into group, when you do your problem statement, when you're writing your objectives, when you're talking about your budget, when you're talking about your evaluation, sustainability, it has to be one story. You have to be sure that you're staying, that one section is connecting to the last. If there's anything that I hate as a reader, is when I'm reading something in the evaluation section and I go, well, that's really interesting, but I don't really remember, they're evaluating something I don't remember them defining as the problem. And then I have to go back to the problem section and say, yeah, and if I have to start doing that kind of searching, I don't like it. I want it to jump out at me. I want it to be in frame. I want the story to make sense. I want the problem to jump out to be very clearly the problem I've been asking you for. Again, I want you to be specific and to the point and write on what it is I said I'm going to fund. I want you to build your story around the data, so that if you have a data set that's going to be persuasive and show it, put it out to me, show it to me. But then make sure that's the data that we're evaluating. Don't tell me about a bunch of data that's out there about how it's going to demonstrate the problem you're solving and the objectives you're doing, and then we're evaluating something else altogether. That string or golden thread, perhaps you could call it, between each of the sections is the fabric of the story, is making sure that the whole story holds together, that all of those different sections. Now, Ryan talked about bringing in team members a lot, and that is one of the things you get a disjointed proposal. If you assign different sections of different people, everyone's not exactly aligned. You really do have to have a lead writer and a lead person who's making sure the fabric of the story is in the same voice and is the same kind of persuasions and weaving together the different kind of things. We're seeing more and more funders want to see people that are involved in what you're providing, being involved in the design so whoever the target population of what you're doing, we're seeing more and more want to see involvement of those that you serve in the design of your model. Seeing that come through in your writing is important, and describing how you do that. And again, that can be in various sections. Cost effectiveness, I think. One of the tips that I think is important, and Ryan touched on this, is hitting that line between cost effectiveness and reality of what you really need for funding. When I read grants, I read the budget first. I go to the budget section first, and I want to see what you're really going to do, because what you're funding is what you're really going to do. So if you tell me you have this elaborate evaluation design that is involving a quasi experimental design, and that you're going to have a very in-depth look, but that you've really only assigned a quarter of an FTE that you're paying for, that's in charge of doing that, then I don't think you're really doing that. If you tell me that you have this this big design program, one of the things that I see, again, and this is that alignment that I'm talking about, that there's a thread from the beginning to the end, so that if you tell me all these wonderful things that you're going to implement and do as your objectives, but that I see that it's 0.1 of Ryan's time and 0.1 of Kate's time and 0.1 of Jeff's time, but nobody's really in charge, and that no one's really assigned and tasked and paid, again, to do that thing, then I question about your credibility. And I've got a problem with the ethos of you. I've got the problem of whether you're really going to be able to pull this off. So you really, as you do these, showing that, telling that story is really kind of that, making sure that they all link together, that it is a single story, and that you're thinking about how all these parts tie together. I can't do a major evaluation and research on a small $50,000 grant that's, I don't want to overstate that I'm curing suicide, when really all I want to do, although I want to do that, that may be my aim, and I may be talking about that as my grand idea, but really all I might be doing is implementing a universal screening in a local school system. So then I want to just evaluate that, and I could be able to evaluate what I'm doing. We'll talk more about that in groups as we talk about evaluation. The next slide, I think what we're going to see is just the getting help part.
Hey, Jeff, one of the things I was going to also say about followed directions, quick story, is a person I know who took an organizational leadership class from years ago. I said this exact thing. We say this all the time. Jeff saying, not get creative. Oh, I'm going to try something new and different. I'll really stand out. No, follow the directions, follow the directions, follow the directions. And she remembered this. I told her this. They had Victims Against Women Act money, federal dollars that went into local communities. They received those dollars, and it was just kind of supplemental funding. So it was almost guaranteed for anyone who then applied for the supplemental funding. And on the instructions, it specifically said 12-point font, 1-inch margins, Times New Roman, whatever it was. They ended up doing they didn't have enough space. It was like a 10-page limit. And they decided to go ahead and make it was like a 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch margins. Garbage. It was thrown out. It was $50,000 guaranteed in supplemental funding to these VAWA applicants, and they didn't get it because they didn't follow the directions. I've been hearing, John Tester blew up on a group on this years ago through Upward Bound program that did something similar. I still hear stories like this. This has been my experience. So it is important to make sure that you are following those, whether it's the point font margins, whatever it might be. It was a $50,000 error that they had the money basically was going to be given to them. But there's somebody who was reviewing who wanted to sort out, we know we've got 100 applicants. Let's get rid of, a certain percentage of them right now. And that's what happened. So that direction piece is important.
Ryan, thanks for leaning into that level of it too. Yeah, directions about format, also when you need to turn it in, the deadlines. There was you have to meet the deadline. 5 minutes late is ineligible. Now you may find some foundations that are smaller that have some more flexibility, but no, they don't. And it's what they'll say, and they're right, is it's not fair to the other people that are putting in. Similar to kind of big mistake examples, the insurer, health insurance for the state of Montana was changed once, maybe this was 5 years ago, because one of the bidders, I think it was the old Blue Cross Blue Shield before it was merged with who they are with now, was finishing their proposal. They were in Helena. They were getting it across town to the Department of Administration. The person had car troubles on the way, brought that proposal over, and was late. Got to the Department of Administration 10 minutes after the proposals were due. And the entire health system of every employee in the state of Montana shifted from Blue Cross Blue Shield to another provider, another insurance provider. That's a big contract. That's a big mistake. You have to follow the rules. You have to follow the directions. You have to get it in on time, the fonts on time. Certain federal grants require you to use certain, boy, Kate, you could probably help me here. I can't remember the name of it, but there's certain formats of that you have to enter into their system. They have systems that receive the grants. I'm just losing the name of that right now. Anyway, that follow directions, can't, and read them many times. I've been using this analogy in a few different things lately, but to me, the directions of a grant are much like reading law or looking at a map. Every time I look at a map, even if it's somewhere I know where I'm going, it reads a little bit different every time. Be more than one person reading the directions. Read them yourself, have someone else read them, compare what you think each section says. Kate, I think, gave very good advice about outlining the whole project. When you get that outline and you have those sections done, go back, reread the directions about those sections, and then reread them again, and then read what you've written, and then reread them again. Throughout the entire process. It's not a read them at the beginning and then go do. You want to read them multiple times throughout the process. Make sure you're staying on track. And then if there's a confusing part, reach out to the funder. Some of them are going to have very strict limits about giving you clarification, and you're going to have to do them in a webinar, or you're going to have to do them in a formal process. That's going to be in the directions. Others are going to be more open to a relationship, and you can call them anytime and they're going to help you, but they're really just looking for the best possible proposals. So you're going to have to know, again, it's relationship and knowing your funder, but never be afraid to reach out. I don't think there's ever a case where you can ask a question or reach out to a funder where they think, oh my God, these guys have no idea what they're doing. I think funders want you to reach out to them. They want to get responsive proposals. The people that are funding have a responsibility to someone as well, to fund this and to be a good fiduciary, to have a good, be responsible and accountable for who they fund. They want the people they fund to be successful. They really are looking for someone to follow, to do, but remember, this is that unique part, to do what they want to do. And that may or not, what you have to do is persuade them that what they want to do is exactly what you do. And you want to make sure you get that point. This is what we do. We didn't just make this up at dinner last night. It's something we've been doing. That should be part of the story. This is part of the fabric of what my organization is about, what our agency is about, what our mission's about. We've been working on this effort for years. These are the ways we've been doing it, very specific and to the point ways. Isn't it serendipitous that we showed up in your world? That's kind of the message that you want that reader to get. It's, oh my God, I can't believe we heard from this, this one proposer. They get us. They get us as a funder. They're exactly what they do is what we've been looking for. That's the feeling that you want to evoke. Boy, they told their story. It's just like the story I told when I was presenting to the board about what we're funding this year. This is exactly who we are. That you want to fit into their story as well. So you need to know what their story is. Nuts and bolts, short sentences, active verbs, readable, and then get an editor. Get two editors. The short sentence, there's a little irony that I'm presenting the short sentences, active verbs, and all of that. I'm a recovering attorney, and that's not my best thing. But I know that. And so I can get ideas out and I can get them down. But it's crucial for me when I'm doing grant writing to find proofreaders and good editors and people that aren't shy about saying, Jesus, Jeff, what do this makes no sense. You don't want people just to proofread. And I see this a lot is someone who's a lead in an organization may be writing the grant. The proofreaders may be employees that work for them. And they're a little shy about saying, boy, this isn't very good. This isn't very clear. I don't know what you're talking about. You're out of your mind. You've got to get proofreaders that are going to be that are going to hurt your feelings, for making you feel like you don't know how to write at all. You want someone to really tear it apart and put it back together and call out every little thing. Remember that the person who's reading this isn't necessarily an expert on exactly what you do and how you do it. You have to be able to explain things very clearly. You want to make sure you're not, again, we've mentioned talking in jargon and those things. They don't know you. They don't know what you do. They don't know your community. They don't know, again, looking at our group, they don't know even anything about your state or specifics, or if they do, it's just a very narrow piece. So make sure that you've got good proofreaders, and then that your proofreader, one of them at least, or another person or yourself is again, double check all the directions. Make sure your attachments are there. Make sure it allows for attachments. Some grants don't allow for attachments. Make sure that it's the right number of pages. Make sure that your tables line up and that you don't have your numbers and your tables and your attachments misnumbered. All of those things that are just annoying for a reader who's got to go through a pile of these. And then the last point here, keep them together for future reference. If you're chasing a grant, and if you're, and some agencies just go from grant to grant to grant, and no judgment about that people do survive that way. That's a very hard way to survive. But if you write a grant and you don't get funded by a particular funder, it takes a lot of time. And we've mentioned that it's going to take longer than you think. It's a big investment to write a grant. So it really should fit into where you're headed anyway, and what you're about anyway, and what you're doing. It shouldn't be like, oh, it would be cool to get this money, let's try this. It should be, this is what we're about and what we're doing. And as a reader, again, now I'm looking for that. I'm looking for that story is consistent with your mission. I'm looking you up. I'm looking at your webpage. I'm seeing how this fits in with you. I want to get to know you before I fund you and make that final decision. So save those documents and keep them in place for future reference, because you'll be able to reuse them. You'll be able to refine your thoughts. You'll be able to explain them better. Writing a grant, and it should never be a waste of time. It should always forward your mission. It should always forward your thinking. It should always fit into what you were doing anyway, or a direction you wanted to head anyway, so that the reference of keeping that and the value of the exercise, if you would, even if you are not successful, forwards your mission and forwards what you're trying to do as an agency, as an organization, as whatever group that you might be. So keep those. You can reuse those. You can and you should be able to borrow from what you've learned and put together in your grant proposal, in your strategic planning, and in forwarding kind of what you do anyway. Any questions out there? Anything Kate or Ryan want to add to this? Ryan, do you want to kick off the next piece then?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I don't have anything to add. Trying to keep my yapper shut here. I seem to keep jumping in all the time. Let's go ahead and do this. I think that will be put into smaller groups. And there'll be 3 different groups that will be randomly assigned to. If we take like a 5-minute break right now, get a chance for Zoom to do what it needs to do, and Emily, for you to switch us around, 5 minutes, move around, we'll come back and join our small groups and go off from there. And I think we can still, although we're running a little behind here, I think we can still probably do the 55 minutes, Emily, and then we can always shorten a little bit on the back end.
Okay, sounds good.
So just really quick, I wanted to let folks know that I shared in the chat a template, a grant planning worksheet template. And so Ryan, Jeff, and I are going to be going through this, but I think it'll be helpful for you to have that on your computer. So go ahead and download that so you can have access to it, because you may be taking some notes as we walk through the template.
Thank you, Kate. Ryan, you guys had sent that anatomy of a grant document. Should they have that before their breakouts too?
Sure, you can send them any of those handouts at this point, you bet. And then
Okay.
yeah,
I can do that too. I can drop that in. I have that
Perfect.
available. So I'll do that real quick.
Sounds good. And rooms will be ready. So yeah, as soon as we come back, I'll open them up.
We're back now to brighten your day up.
Yay.
Yeah.
I hope everybody enjoyed the conversation as much as I did in our small group. I hope the members of my small group enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. We didn't get into that evaluation piece yet. What we want to do now is, whoops, there we go. We want to open it up to the whole group for questions. I'm going to give a chance for Kate and Ryan and then myself to talk about what we learned and kind of what some of the hot topics were. But I really want to encourage the whole group to feel free to jump in and ask questions, jump into the chat and throw any questions if there are any things that got left hanging in your group that you'd like to pick up on. I know I'm going to introduce one topic at least that I thought would be nice to introduce for the whole group. That was just a really great question, a couple of them. So with that, Ryan, do you want to start and talk a little bit about your group?
Sure thing, Jeff. Yeah, so we, like you, I think, got through the first 4 sections like usual and then get to evaluation budget area, but spoke a little bit to creating a strong needs assessment or problem statement, approaching it from multiple angles in terms of the complexity of some of these problems that may be, as we were looking at training, looking at emergency training, EMT training and first responder training in behavioral health. You'll see this in crisis intervention teams across Montana, sort of expanding that in some ways so that we can decrease the likelihood, or I guess I should flip that, really speak to the positive of it, increase opportunities for young people to get the help they need when they're in a mental health crisis, and perhaps decrease the likelihood that they end up in the correctional system, whether it be local jail, Warm Springs, or end up in a show dare, sort of alleviate some of the pressure on those systems so that we don't continue to try to look for beds that don't exist, that we can get them medication and get them stabilized as best as possible, with first responders receiving additional training that allow them to do that. So we looked at that problem from a number of different angles. It's a problem across the state of Montana, and it could be decreasing homelessness and suicide and homicide and deaths that we've had in a number of communities as well, in addition to promoting services and mental health stabilization. And then, as mentioned, kind of decrease the pressure on some of those service providers, not just healthcare, but also judicial, so we can keep people out of, hopefully, and prevent them from getting into the public defenders and judges, and perhaps even in Montana State Prison, that we've got people who are incarcerated that need healthcare. So we were able to take a look at that in terms of the problem statement, and also in terms of what kind of a what might be benefits in multiple places and multiple arenas, so we can prevent the strain on the system that many folks are experiencing these days. And then I think we got a little bit toward then what kind of a program might be put in place in order to provide folks that are in emergency responders in terms of some of this training that would be provided, in order to give them sort of the crisis intervention skills and the ability to de-escalate these situations when they are responding to 911 calls, the first folks on the scene, whatever the situation might be, and then thinking about some of the fiscal outcomes of this too. So there's many in terms of we think about this sometimes in terms of the humanity level outcomes that are positive, but also the people are going to be looking at it on a fiscal level in terms of money savings, both in healthcare and in the judicial system, and how it is that we could begin to substantiate a strong return on investment for those who are looking at the bottom line in relation to how much money is being invested and how much we could potentially save. So that's where we got to, and we weren't able to get then to evaluation of that or budgeting of that, but we worked our way through that.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Anyone from Ryan's group that wants to add anything to that? Going once, Okay. Kate, you want to talk about
Yeah,
your group?
sure. Yeah, so one thing I thought was pretty cool about our group is that folks, there were maybe half the group that aren't, their position doesn't involve writing grants, but that they are in charge of implementing grants. And so I just want to say a little shout out to folks that are on this call that, you know, it may not be part of your job now, it could be in the future, but I will say the more you know about this process of securing funding, you know, what it's like to develop the idea, develop the proposal, write the grant, the better you're going to be able to implement and the better partner you're going to be for the rest of your full team, because you're going to understand the nuances. So shout out to people who are here to learn, but it may not be directly applicable right now. We talked about, we did get to the evaluation piece, and just, you know, one member of our group made that connection between the evaluation and the methods section being really in, you know, very much intertwined. And I think I serve as an evaluator on several of our projects. And so I do tend to think through that lens, but I think it's helpful to keep the evaluation, keep the end in mind as we're developing our activities, our objectives, and as we're developing our plan, because if we can't create a plan that is in fact measurable, then we're not going to, one, get funded, and if funded, we're not going to be able to demonstrate our success. So we did talk about that. One member of our group gave the example of tackling underage drinking, substance use, and really relying on, you know, other communities to better understand, one, how they're defining the problem, two, how they're proposing to address the problem, and then three, what outcomes, what changes they've seen as well. And so, you know, we're a large geographic state, but also a small state in the sense that we can call up our neighbors. That's part of our culture. Call up our neighbors and say, you know, how have you dealt with this? How can what mistakes did you make along the way, and how can we learn so that we can do this even better? So any other comments from our group that you want to bring to the large group? Okay.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Kate's group. Our group walked through and we talked about different sections, and it was, I think we touched everything some, and really did bring some focus to how they're all very connected. And I think that was probably a part of my theme today, was the as we're talking about a problem statement and we're talking about goals, that we should be thinking about the end piece of how we'll define success, and then how evaluation is tied to that, and how sustainability is tied to that. And so I think that story of grants came through well. We had to me, it was interesting. It was, our group was geographically spread out: Colorado, a couple of people from Ohio, Pakistan, and then more locally, Cascade County, Helena, and then by and large, and I don't know if this is 100%, but folks were very new to their positions, and very and so looking at grants as something that was kind of emerging in their worlds. And there was definitely a theme and a strongly held theme of people are interested in moving past COVID. Imagine that. But that so much of the funding and so much of the funding pieces that we've been working with for a while now is COVID, and people are recognizing that there's other values and other important issues in their communities that they'd like to lean into their new jobs and into grant world to start to address things that are not just COVID funded pieces. And that extended from emergency responses to working with elderly and aging populations, to working with LGBTQ populations, and emergency preparedness, all the way to working with farmers markets, I think was someone mentioned. And then an area that we spent a little bit more time digging a little deeper into, recruitment and retention, especially for people with higher skilled, higher level positions. And as we know, that's a huge issue really for everyone everywhere. We're finding that to be. We dug into, we had some specific questions that I'll share, and so that it'll give a chance not only for Ryan or Kate maybe to respond to some of these, but other people in the whole group. We talked a lot about problem statements and the importance of really nailing that down. And then what amount of data and how do you use data in a problem statement? And we talked about, yeah, you want some real kind of punch in the face kind of data to get people's attention, to demonstrate that this really is a problem, and that who it's a problem for. And we talked a good bit about who cares, and helping kind of refine, if this is really a problem and it's a problem, who cares? Who's it a problem for? And how do you express that? And how do you express that quickly? We got into goals and outcomes. Where are we getting to? And I had to be helped, and I'd have to be helped again about SMART goals, but having measurable, objective, timely goals. And we had some good examples of how that might work. There was really good questions within work plans around specificity, and that's when I would throw to the group too. Is how specific do we get? And we talked about the linkage between the work plan and the budget and the evaluation, and that specificity really needs to tell me how you're spending your money. But then how detailed does that get? Obviously, I'm not counting paper clips. I don't want to get into that mundane, but that if it's too vague and too broad, that I don't really know where the money's going, and I don't really know why your plan and your methods are going to tackle the problem that you've described. Again, trying to keep those links between these different areas. So that was a good question, and one that I think went across the whole group. We talked about sustainability, and then we also talked about work plans and budget. And kind of this topic crossed all of them. Was that things change, that you write a grant and in a static moment, and that you have to use a level of specificity, but that the world changes, time changes, that by the time you actually get the grant, hire staff, get things going, how much gear changing do you do? And then how transparent are you with the funder about whether or not you're going to be flexible, that we're asking for this, but we think it could change to that. And so that balance between transparency and being very honest and real about a sustainability plan and what you're trying versus very positive. And Ryan's going to touch some of this, I think, in the next section with some do's and don'ts and hopes. But there is that question of you want to be very certain, you want to demonstrate the evidence that what you do is going to work. And then we lean that into evaluation, is that how different funders are open more and less to finding something that doesn't work. And that if you are doing an honest evaluation, and you should be doing honest evaluations, you may demonstrate that something that's evidence-based somewhere else doesn't work in your jurisdiction. But that's a difficult question and a tightrope you have to walk about how transparent to be with that. And that really can depend on the funder, and really drives what we were saying earlier about know your funder, do some research and find out, what if they lean into that kind of thinking. A lot of interest, and we'll talk more in the next section about finding grants. That a lot of, where do I find money for this? Where do I find money for that? How do I find the right grant agency? And then some post-grant kind of issue discussions around just managing, again, back to funders if there's line item changes or things that you need different. Time management, how do I borrow time and money from one grant to be working on things that are outside of that grant? Where's that ethical line of how that works? How transparent should I be in my work plan that there are things that I need to do that will be general training for my project manager across our organization that may not actually be that grant focused or specific. So how do I address those kinds of things? Anyone from my group that would add anything to that or highlight anything that you could do that in the chat as well if you'd like. What I'd like to do is I'd just like everyone to use the chat and maybe just define one takeaway that you had from your small group that is something that just a takeaway. I need just a few words or sentence in the chat of an important takeaway. And I think for each to be able to read that from each other's, that might help some of you kind of bring some focus to some points you might even want to come back and ask more questions about. So if people just take a minute, we'll pause for a sec or a minute what's a takeaway from the group that's a piece that's helpful, or that you, or it could be in the form of a question, what you're still needing to have more focus on and learn more about.
Jeff, and I'll go ahead and start migrating over here as folks are putting those takeaways in. It's helpful to see as well. I wanted to mention too, and this kind of gets into what we're addressing here, is the specificity you'd mentioned. And I lean more toward the paperclip specificity versus the general vague, we think we're going to, and we might, and we hope to. And this is kind of what we're thinking. And boy, I have a hard time putting money into a house somebody wants to build without a blueprint. And so I like that specificity. There are times you may have planning grants, and in those planning grants, that gives an opportunity for folks to be able to sort of begin to get groups of people together to then do the initial legwork to start putting something together, or more of a plan together. But most are looking for, what is the plan specifically you are going to move forward in order to address this problem? A lot of good takeaways.
Yeah, these are great. I hope people are going and looking at other folks' as well, because I think it captures a little bit of where Ryan or Kate or I or different members of our groups leaned a little bit different directions.
And Jeff, I'll go ahead and jump into this next section here that'll help us kind of keep us moving forward. And we know we're going to have other questions that will come up here as well.
Excellent.
And I think we'll be able to address some of these areas in a little bit more detail also as we move forward. And we've got limited time here. We want to make sure we make our way through all of this. Some of the way, this is some of the specificity I just mentioned. And some of the applications will ask for, we want a work plan, all right? And you may think, gosh, I've never done a work plan. You know, you Google it, look at a couple of work plans, go, oh, okay, I see. Who does what, when, where, and what does it look like? It isn't so hard. It's a table, it's a chart. We can put something like that together. There also might be an opportunity to add that as an appendix or one of many appendices. So it may be that we've got a 20-page limit and boy, we're already over the limit. Oh, good, look at Appendix A. And that's our work plan. We want to show that to them and we can add it as an appendix, and maybe it won't count toward the total page count, whatever the situation might be. There are ways to do that. I build in charts oftentimes within the narrative as ways to say, all right, you know, here's what we're planning to do. And in that program method section, here's what we plan to do. Having that work plan of, you know, I can see you're thinking, wow, you're going to hire a person within the first month, you're going to get them started with, you're going to implement this training curriculum at this particular date and time. That is clear. I don't have to have you here explaining to me what you're going to do, because you are explaining it with such clarity that it's an aha for the reader to know exactly what you're going to do moving forward. So they may ask for a work plan, they may ask for a logic model to do that. Those are not rocket science. You Google them, look at some examples and go, okay, kind of got an idea of what that looks like. I think we've got examples on our website as well that you could take a look at and run that forward also, no problem. All right, now there's, again, ways to be writing this. Again, if you were not doing, we're writing a grant, it's not a planning grant. There's some language here that may be important to pay attention to, that I, as a reader and a grant reviewer for many years, would look for a certain level of confidence and assuredness that these folks know what they're doing. They have a plan in place. They know where they're going with this plan, and they know who's involved at multiple levels in executing that plan. Wording like "we hope to" doesn't instill within the reader very much confidence that this is going to get carried out. Or we plan to. Again, most of them are planning grants. Some of them are that we're planning on doing this. I'm going to give you $100,000 for you to plan to do something, or am I giving you $100,000 to do something? So I always like it when it's we are making momentum on this. We've gotten together, we've had conversations, we've met with different partners, we've identified what the heck's going on. We've got people who are committed, and here's what we're going to do. Good, you've already got a lot of the legwork developed. Now we're going to get down to business here and get some things done. So rather than the hope to and the plan to, we could probably write something that might be a little stronger, that would have more specificity around this particular statement. The $100,000 requested, We're identifying decreasing child neglect, Roosevelt County Head Start program. There's clarity in this sentence that helps me to have that aha, versus general vague language. What would I go? I don't know what you're doing. I don't get it. I don't understand it. And I don't share your understanding. You guys understand it really well. Now you've got to explain it to the layperson in ways that when they walk away and going, I've got it. You've explained this very clearly with great specificity that allows me to know exactly where this money is going to go and what it's going to be used for. All right. The "we hope to" also, when you're using, generally speaking, especially when you get into, the organization is making an application. So it could be, in this case, let's say Roosevelt County Head Start. That's the "we." It could be a bunch of different organizations that got together on this. That might be the "we." It could be the team that's writing the grant proposal. That might be the "we." I don't know. So I like it to be the grant writing team, Roosevelt County Head Start, Montana Department of Public Health and Human Service, Child Service Division. Good. I know who the "we" is. Here, I'm not sure who that is, and I'm having a guess. It's kind of like Jeff was saying, if I have to go back and read and reread and try to understand what you're saying, you're just irritating your reader, and they're not probably understanding very clearly who's doing what and when. So specificity, really important. Second area here, focusing on we feel that, or many people feel that. Again, we need more specificity. Who is we? Who are many people? Is many people 15 or 1,500? I don't know what many means. So you're having me guess, and I'm the devil's advocate reading this oftentimes, where I might say, I don't know who he is. I don't know who many are. I don't even know who the people are. Give me more detail so I understand specifically. So you can see some potential ways to word this. So it's Silver Bow County, it's Cascade County. Good. I've got a much clearer idea of who you're talking about in terms of the "we" and in terms of the issue at hand. I've read many proposals that are along the lines of, we hope to organize a group of people to look at this issue further. And this isn't a planning grant. This is a get it done grant. And when I read that, I was like, really, what else are you planning to do that hopefully might carry off? We've got limited funding here. And we're hoping that these people will come together to meet to talk about this. That doesn't sound like it's got a very high likelihood of success. So why would we put money in and invest these, donor monies or taxpayer dollars into this? Let's get something solid and concrete moving forward. That's something I'd love to invest in. But when you use vague language, you're not very convincing to your reader. All right. Some other examples here may have to do with meth is a huge problem. It's a huge problem in the whole state. Cascade County has some data I've looked at that indicates that it's a problem. I don't know what huge means, but I have some specific numerical validation or verification of this is a problem, that helps. So in this case, it's Cascade County Law Enforcement Division. This takes more work. I think that it's just lazy writing. Meth is a huge problem in Cascade County. Okay, we already know that. Work harder at creating a smarter sentence where I go, oh, 15% increase from a certain time period. That is specificity and clarity. Now I understand the gravity of the problem, not just that somebody thinks it's huge. And these aren't hypothetical. I've read these many times in many different kinds of proposals. Hundreds of people are negatively affected. I don't know if that's 200, 102, or 1,200. I've got to have something more specific. So in this case, then we get we break that down a little bit into a community health assessment in a particular year, the exact number of people as best we can get with data that we're collecting. And then we're looking specifically at an area of Montana. So we're getting, again, going from something very general down to distilling it into something much more specific. Good. I've got a really clear idea of the gravity of this problem. Very helpful. Now I've got an aha moment. I'm able to move on. I got the specificity and clarity I need. Okay. Kate, do you want to take a look at and talk a little bit about this scoring rubric?
Yeah, sure. I think, we can, this is a quick one, but an important part of the grant writing. And here we have an example of a funding proposal rubric. We talked about the anatomy of the grant, the different sections, and the readers are going to be scoring your proposals based on a certain rubric, giving you a 3, a 2, a 1 based on how clearly your proposal matches what they're asking you to match. Another thing, Jeff mentioned this, and I just want to reiterate it, is that oftentimes in the RFPs, there will have a points per section, right? So your statement of need will be 20 points, your budget will be 10 points. And while you want to, make sure that you're addressing all the aspects of those in the sections, if it's a 35 point, if it's the highest points are in that section, you want to make sure that you're really addressing, you have a really strong section. So you certainly want to, usually at the bottom of the proposal, it's going to say specifically the rubric or the points per section. And you want to make sure that you're really paying attention to that and writing so that you're addressing those issues, and particularly the high point items. I want to pay a lot of attention to. Jeff, Ryan, anything else you'd add about this section?
I would just reiterate, we're kind of hitting this quick and dirty, but it's really important. And when we talked about following directions and making sure, this is the nuts and bolts. This is where the rubber meets the road of what they really want. And when you get the more specific they are about how they're going to review your proposal and how they're going to assign points to those proposals, that is really important information. So I just, even though we're not spending a lot of time, I would encourage you to spend a lot of time on what their rubric is of how they're reviewing your proposal.
I think the other part of this too is related to, I think Kate might have mentioned this, but here you have a rubric that is going from a 1 to 3 scale. I've also seen them 1 to 10, 1 to 5, and everybody kind of comes up with their own. And then different sections have different weights. So it could be that the problem statement is weighted at 25%. So your score of a 3 on the problem statement is weighted at 25% of the total of 100%, and it could be the budget's at 10%. So they oftentimes have this available. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes you can ask them if they have a scoring rubric and if there's any information that you could get about it. I've had folks sometimes say, no, we don't have one. We just say yes or no, and the yeses then get another level of oversight, and the no's get put in the no, or there may be a maybe category as well. And do it without something like this in place. But there's usually in the state of Montana has, through their procurement division, will have these types of categories, but then we'll have a certain weight to each category with regard to a certain percentage that's given to each of those sections in terms of the strength, evaluation, what have you. And one of the things that we might do too, as we continue to move through this, and I think Jeff, you're going to talk a little bit about here in a minute, some of the resources they can access through our website. And I may have to give you the ability to share your screen. If anybody wants to put in the chat as well as we move our way into the getting closer to 12 o'clock hour, we get a couple of minutes at the end to answer any questions. And I think there were some that Jeff had mentioned with regard to budget questions or any other questions you're thinking of right now. You might start writing those in, and then in the last 10 minutes, we can answer some of those questions in a little bit more detail. Jeff, are you wanting to share their screen, or am I just projecting something onto you right now? It's interesting. Reading his lips is always hard. I've known him for 35 years and I still can't do it very well.
And then I went back around and then it was all done. I don't have screen sharing, so whoever's running the screen can either bring up the website.
I'm sorry, and I can give you that power.
All right, give away and we'll see how I manage that power.
Here we go. You're now co-host.
Oh my God.
Abilities.
All right,
Use them for good.
We'll see how I do, right? This can always be an interesting project for me. All right, give me a minute here. God dang it.
Let us know if we can jump in too, Jeff.
Well, you go ahead and talk and fill in the gap while I figure out how to get to the screen I want to share. Because that's not the one. But
I can go ahead, Jeff, here too. We've been hearing from a lot of folks around the state that boy, we'd love it if we had resources more readily available at hand on someplace we can access that very easily. And you can see here with our University of Montana website in the resource library tab, we wanted to create that for folks so that you weren't doing all this work of digging around for this information. We could consolidate it into one area to make it much easier and save people time. So Jeff, you can go ahead and explain it from there probably better than I can.
Great. So this is the main site, and if you can see my screen, right? Everyone can see this. Cool. So you'll see up, like, you know where to look. health.umt.edu/CCFWD, Center for Children, Families, and Workforce Development. So when you go there, you'll come to this page. And one of the things that I like about our website is, and I think we've tried to do, is there's multiple ways to get to different parts of these things. So there's a lot of different resources in here in our resource library. We have research and evaluation, which shows you data and different pieces. I'm going to come back and talk about the data dashboard in a sec here. And you'll see in our policy world that we do work in grant and revenue development. So one of the center pieces of this, this toolkit for grant writers, I would invite all of you, especially the many of you that have described yourself as new into positions and new into the world of grant writing. This is designed in a course format that really will help you develop your grant writing skills. And you can come in here and go to this toolkit. I'll just keep walking through it, and we'll go back in a sec. It's going to walk through a lot of the different things that you've seen us talk about today, and it gets into specificity, and it gets into different parts of I'm not going to click further down, but if you're working on a problem statement, it'll give you some examples of what does a description of need look like. How do I write SMART goals? How do I make sure they're measurable and objective? How do I do a sustainability plan? One thing that often comes up, someone mentioned already, I think Ryan did, logic models. People get scared about, how do I do a sustainability plan? I clicked on the wrong one, but I'll go with what I've got in front of you. We've talked a lot about sustainability plans. We've talked around them, but what does one really look like? So by coming into here, we've got examples of this is what a sustainability plan looks like and sounds like. So I know you can't read this as I scroll through it quickly, but I just want to show you that we've really broken some things down into some nuts and bolts that will allow you to to see in action what some examples. We pulled examples from grants that have been successful. We pulled examples from different grant writers, so there's different approaches to different things. So again, I would encourage you, especially at this point, throw questions in the chat if you want me to slow down or dive deeper anywhere, and I'll ask Ryan and Kate to call those out as they may show up. The other piece that's been asked a lot today now is this find grants. And so if you go in here again, keep you oriented here, we went to our main website and we came down here to our resource library, and we came into our grant and revenue development section. We have staff that is busily keeping track of different grants that are open all the time, and we try to organize them in different ways that'll be available for you. Well, we have contact information on here. If you see here, if you have specific grants or specific topics you're looking for, we'll do some research for you. We'll try to find grants that meet what your needs are. We have some funders that recognize the value of, the more we can leverage and support local folks in that grant piece of where do I find money? Where is it at? We have local grants, tribal grants, state grants, public health is a specific focus. And you'll see when you go into there, there are these grant tables that we try to keep current and updated, and hopefully that prove to be true. So these are just very specific grants, local, coming out of different agencies. Some are private, some are big, some are National Science Foundation, CDC. It gives you information about number of awards and the award ceiling, how much money you can ask for, what they're generally for. Most importantly, it gives you a link to be able to click right into that grant. So I'm interested in a micro grant that bridges ideas and actions to help young citizen leaders. That fits on. There's a group of kids in my community. They've been wanting to build a new playground. They need to get money for that. This kids group has been coming together. They've partnered with senior citizens. It's a really cool group. Boy, I think this might fit exactly. Number of awards. When you're looking at applying for a grant, it's important to look at how much money is being given out and how many awards. If you see this number is very, very, very small, and it's a competitive grant across the country, and the CDC is giving out 4 grants, and you're a small county in Custer County, Montana, there's a good chance that they already know who that 4 counties are. And that's, to be able to compete with every county across the country for something that's 4 awards, that's something to consider. If it's 196 awards, it tells you, boy, they're really going to spread this money out to a lot of state, in this case, state health departments and states, and so I'd have a bigger chance. So we list that in here to help you think about that. Here's an example of 6, 6 awards for this maternal and child secondary health. You'd probably be able to be pretty advanced in this area, have a pretty good plan, have some relationship probably already with HRSA, with the Health Resource Services Administration. So anyway, you can see these are different things. We keep these updated regularly, and as I said, you should feel free to reach out to us if there's some specific areas that you'd like some help with searching on. I think there's a handout that follows this, and Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, but that will give you some of the specific areas we look at to build this. We look at grants.gov. That's a big area. I guess we can put that in the chat as well. But grants.gov, there's a thing called RHI Hub. I don't know what RHI stands for. I probably should. But RHI Hub is another search place to look for grants. Philanthropy News is a good source that we look at regularly to see what's out there. There's a Digest RFP. We've used the word RFP. Someone asked, that's request for proposals, but the Digest RFP alerts is another site that you can look at. And again, when I'm done chatting, or maybe someone could capture these and write them in the chat now. There's another program called Instrumental that we've just started using. So when you see what we've listed here in these grant tables, that is we try to put together based on interest and based on things that we hear people talking about to make it most useful. Any questions popping up as I go along here? So again, we're at this health.umt.edu. We got into finding grants. Again, and there's more information about writing grants. A lot of the information we presented today that'll provide more detail. And I think, oh, good. And I should have remembered that this was here. Here's that RHI Rural Health Information Hub, grants.gov. So links to these places that will show you where some of these grants are on the website here. So you can find those as well. This 990 Finder, this is a good way. We've talked today about how to research the foundations that you might be asking or places that you might be asking for money from. The 990 is a tax form, and these big foundations have to file tax forms just like the rest of us. And that's a great way to search what they've funded in the past. That's kind of a good secret to know, is that on their tax forms, they have to list how much money they've given to who in the past year. And they're usually a little bit outdated when you get to the 990 Finder. You don't usually have the current year. It usually is a year ago or 2 years ago. But it tells you very specifically, what organizations they funded, and then you can always go to that organization's website, which almost always has something about that grant that they've done specifically, and you can get that flavor. And it tells you how much money they gave for kind of things, and you can see that exactly while they're what gets listed and you might read about might sound very broad, and like that they fund a lot of things. You might see that they do fund a lot of things, but it's in one certain geographic region all the time. But boy, this is a great grant, but they tend to only fund folks in North Dakota. And we don't know why. We don't have to know why. We can just see, geez, they just tend to fund North Dakota. These guys just tend to fund Western Montana. These guys tend to fund Eastern Montana. You can see different trends like that. They might talk about anything that helps kids grow, but you'll see that all their grants are focused on playground equipment. And that might be a win for you or not. So that 990 Finder is a great place to dig deeper to learn some of the things that are going on. I'm seeing in the chat there's some things, but that looks like Kate has put up some of these pieces as well. So thanks, Kate, for that. I think if this is the kind of site that it's designed to play around with and come look at. And so I don't know that I need to necessarily dig any deeper into that, although I did want to show you one more piece. We've tried to keep I got to find my way to it, I guess it's the database, Montana Data Dashboard. So I'm still within the health.umt.edu, and I went to our research and evaluation area. And where do I get the data? So we've talked a lot about having the punch of data, and Ryan saying, don't say I hope I feel, get that data. We don't have everything that you need here, but there's a huge platform of information that you can find of different data topics, from families to people to school. You can see the headers here, special topics. Again, I invite you to come in, play around, see what's in here. Ryan, you'll have to correct me. I think there's 135, 150 different data points embedded in this section.
That's right. And then within here are also, you can navigate this by county. So you could go into, there are people who are different parts of Montana or all over Montana. So if you wanted to know the per capita population rates of veterans, you could do that by county if you wanted to, and navigate across the whole state. And there you go. That's an example of it, that you could go into any of those counties in order to find out exactly what those rates are. One of the reasons we developed this was we know that all of you have busy lives and are trying to do many things, and all of us were searching for this data parallel to one another. And it's like, why don't we just try to encapsulate it in one spot so people can navigate this on their own without having to spend so many hours going through it. We have a spot where that all lives. So folks can come here, like Jeff said, and roam around a little bit and be able to see all the different data points that we have here for the different counties in Montana.
I'll just add, there's also a spot where we have a list of, evidence-based practices for different populations for different topics. Not sure if you want to find that, but that can be really helpful when a grant is saying, what evidence-based curriculum, for example, will you be implementing? And so it can be a place that you can start evaluate or start kind of selecting and narrowing down the curriculum, for example, that you want to implement.
Great. Anything else, Ryan or Kate, that you want to add before I stop sharing?
I don't think so. I think there's another place on here too that we even have trouble keeping track of all of what we have on here anymore because there's so much. But I think there's another place on here too where there's a list of all of the different foundations that are in Montana or around Montana or of Montana interest. So all these different family foundations that may exist. So if you're in Dillon saying, gosh, we really don't have much outside of one or two. Well, actually there may be a cluster of a dozen there. You just didn't know about the other ones that we have on a spreadsheet as well. So folks could go, oh my gosh, I didn't know all of those existed. And I looked at it just a few days back and I didn't know half of them that were out there, but we have a list of those as well that help you go beyond the ones that are the most obvious as possible resources.
That's in here, but I'm not going to take your time to search for that right now. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff embedded in here that I think that folks will find helpful. And again, you can always reach out to us at the Center for Children, Families and Workforce Development to help guide you. And if you will be happy to walk through and help get you lined up with the kind of information you're looking for.
And I can go ahead now and questions that folks have. I see one question here related to, as we close out this last few minutes here, and that's a good resource there to that last one, was these questions related to, that was in the chat related to problem statement. So in a problem statement, potentially using both quantitative and qualitative data. And there are a couple different ways to think about that. I think that, and I probably maybe overemphasize, and I sometimes do this in thinking about sometimes writing those problem statements I either sometimes look at it as a funnel or else a pyramid. And in the funnel way of explaining it, sometimes it might get into very broad descriptors around, let's say, for example, it has to do with recidivism rates. And I might go from a national level in describing those, or could even be a global level to something national, to something in the state, something by county or region in Montana, and I get more and more specific. So I might describe this overall problem that exists in terms of recidivism rates for kids that have grown up in foster care, and they have a high recidivism rate, let's say, for perhaps in having the not being able to stay out of correctional facilities, those kinds of things, they end up going back in. And as a result of that, we're seeing that nationally. We're seeing it in the state of Montana. If I have that data, we're seeing it, maybe if I'm focusing on it in a certain county, I'm distilling it, I'm moving down the funnel. At the very bottom of that funnel, I might then use more qualitative data with regard to maybe focus group interview or something along those lines, or even personal communication with somebody who's an expert in this field that substantiates it in, we had somebody here we have folks from Libby, we have folks from Fergus County and Lewistown. I may have it distill it down to Fergus County Police Department, Police, Child and Family Services, whatever it might be, with a very specific story that then sort of further reinforces what's happening national, state, county, and in my local community with a compelling story around, yes, we're not immune to this, and this is something that also exists within a particular community. So that qualitative data is important as well. And I'm on the pyramid side, I might start out with that story. Let me tell you about, and when I used at the very beginning, having to do with anxiety levels, I could quickly assemble a group of school administrators and school counselors and get information around what's happening currently, because they're telling us what's happening currently with regard to suicide thinking and suicide attempts for kids in middle school. I could write a very compelling story right from the very beginning, that problem statement, that then leads me out to not only does this happen on a local level, but this also happens at a county school district level, at a maybe a Western Montana level, statewide level, and I could move it way out. We're not unique and different. We're seeing it here. It's happening across the country. I sometimes now move it more toward that pyramid rather than the funnel, just knowing people's attention span so darn short of grabbing their attention early on of here's what we're seeing. Here's how significant this problem is. And I'm hearing stories of, in small schools of, 7 suicide assessments a day being conducted with kids that are in the 6th and 7th grade. I can tell a pretty darn compelling story about that where people go, oh my God, I didn't know this was the case. I know you don't know that's the case. And it's really incumbent upon me to let you know this is the case so we can do something about it. So I may even present that early on. So I think there's a way to blend both in creating that narrative so that there's certainly compelling data in the quantitative statistical part of what we have, numbers, demographics, but there's also, I think that local story is also important to reemphasize and underscore that point by bringing it down to that local level. Kate or Jeff, anything else you want to add to that?
I would just say, I said earlier, it's that you're appealing to their logic, you're appealing to their intellect and with the data, but don't forget we're also appealing to their emotion, and that these are human stories, and that there are, who really cares, and that caring and who cares part of that qualitative piece is huge. There's emotion behind these stories.
And that we have an ethical and moral obligation to, ensure health among our, fellow Montanans or other citizens, whatever the situation might be. So I think there's a way to blend both of those. Jeff, you had also mentioned some budget questions that folks were asking a little bit about, and I want to make sure that we don't go too far away from that and thinking about, you have sort of personnel and non-personnel categories that are in a budget. You have salaries and fringe and healthcare benefits, creating salaries that are competitive so you can attract people to come in. Each of those line items, as they're referred to, can also be changed after the fact. So it may be that you make a kind of a switch in halfway into year 1, or it could be into year 2, where you say, gosh, to your project manager, I'd like to switch this line item around so we can use these funds a little differently. Things have changed, and they are all the time, with regard to whether it's COVID or certainly many of the retention challenges we have now that may alter the scope of a program, because you might have had, heck, I'm involved with one where we had a number of people identified as project managers, and the money was going to get ready to go out, and I think it was almost all of those project managers have gone into other jobs. So it's like, okay, we got to shift this around a little bit. Yep, we've got to be nimble. We've got to make course corrections here along the way, and that's fine to do that and make those budget alterations. You may also have what's referred to as an indirect cost. So it may be that, all right, this program is going to cost $100,000 for us to pull off. That's how much it's going to cost, $100,000. This is a reasonable budget. And we're going to have, there's this administrative fee that may be attached to it. Payroll, it could be, we have a lot of it associated with overhead that's kind of absorbed in this indirect cost rate. And those indirect cost rates vary. So we would add a certain percentage onto the $100,000 direct cost that we're requesting. We're requesting for direct cost, salary, fringe, healthcare, supplies, equipment, travel. We're also requesting an additional percent of the total direct cost in those indirect costs, again, accounting and overhead, that then account for a total budget cost, direct plus indirect. We have indirect rates that vary, and some of you are going to have a little heart murmur on this, between 5%. That is amazing to have a 5% indirect cost rate, to 40%. So I think we have one grant where we have $300,000 a year, and 40% of it goes to an indirect cost rate. That's a federal grant where it may be easier to get those higher rates, and certainly being at a university, they request them all the time. So automatically I get rid of a 300,000, I get rid of 120, and I'm able to work with only 180. And a certain percentage of that comes back to me, but it's a very low amount. So that's something that's usually discussed and negotiated with the funder, you want to make sure that you do that up front, because if you happen to then write your proposal for $100,000 and all of a sudden you're at Benefice Hospital in Great Falls as an example, and it gets sent through and they say, well, what about payroll? What about overhead? And you go, oh yeah, I forgot. And you didn't have that as part of it. You're going to be swimming upstream for a while, trying to then figure out how to adjust all of your expected expenses and then account for those indirect cost rates that would go to overhead and would go to payroll. Any other questions related to that, budget wise, anything along those lines? And hopefully you do have other people that are smarter than me that understand budgets and accounting that can also help with that. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. We've only got a couple more minutes left. I think that we've covered most of this with respect to taking a look at creating this compelling story, objective data that can support it, using whether it's national or statewide data that's available to you. And sometimes that availability dictates how you're going to create that problem statement. Thinking about and knowing your audience, that's so critical, and making sure you don't spend 50 plus hours putting together a proposal without knowing whether or not this is a good fit and has a high chance of sort of resonating with the readers that are a part of this. Important to know. The timelines, we just got done. Jeff and Kate and I and a couple others, we were just looking at a proposal that came up, and we had about a 6-day time period. But we do work quickly on these, and sometimes we turn them around very fast and say, we can do it. And we have a tendency to not say no enough. And we say, yep, we can pull that off. We looked at this in 6 days and said, gosh, we've got a lot of other things going on. Yes, this would be a good opportunity. No, we're going to pass. The time frame just doesn't make sense. This is a good time to say no. So make sure that you're looking at that time frame, what's reasonable. And no, just like anything else, it usually takes you about twice as long as you think it's going to take. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about that moving forward with the team that you select and people you get on board, and what's reasonable and what's not. Thinking about partnering, and not just folks from your own organization, but we've got maybe folks from law enforcement and other agencies that are part of this. We're not just on our own here, that we've got these other folks that have been doing good work that would also be a part of this, and we would share portions of the budget. People are looking for ways that we're not duplicating and being redundant, but sharing resources wisely. And I think, again, it's figuring out how to write in a compelling way that, you're avoiding assumptions, you're making sure you're explaining it and articulating it very well, so folks can understand what this problem really is and what your solution is moving forward. I guess the last thing I would say is this, and I know people from different places around, not just Montana, but around the state, around the country. I know there's a difficult time, a lot of challenges that we have going on with regard to COVID and other kinds of things that are happening. There are, change takes time, and it takes persistence and patience, and moving a ship heading in one direction, trying to shift that direction takes a long time to do. We are all in the business center that we're a part of changing these systems and addressing these problems, and it takes time. But I can also look back on problems that we've addressed. We've helped shape and change it. State of Montana, drinking and driving was a huge problem 20 years ago. It's still a problem, but we have made inroads on it in ways that I think are significant, ones we should be proud of. It took a lot of time, a lot of people. Teenage pregnancy, the rates of teenage pregnancy are much better than they used to be. It took time, different grant funding programs, persistence, just like what all you folks are aiming for as well. So stay with it and hope that you can create a positive change wherever it is you might be doing the work that you're doing. Emily, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add with regard to course eval.
Yes, thank you so much. I put a link in the chat. I'm going to put it in again. If you can take a moment and just fill out that quick evaluation. We need the data, just like we talked about today with grants. We want to know how this how this training worked for you, if it was useful, how we could improve, things we did great. It helps us so we can continue to offer these wonderful trainings. And so if you can click on that, that would be ideal. We will send out resources to you as soon as we can with a recording of today. And thank you so much to Ryan, Jeff, and Kate. Really appreciate all your work, and we were glad to have you all today.
Thanks for having us.
Have a good one.